Chapter 2393. This was the nature of a fox's lover. When Jin Qian turned around instantly, his back facing her, and ignored her. Love is a taboo on the path of cultivation. Don't talk about it in the future. Love in your heart, but destroying your heart and feelings is the path you should take. His cold words were like ice water in the depths of winter, pouring down on her passion. His breathing did not change at all. He slowly walked forward in the wind and fog. Step by step, as if he was climbing the stairs to heaven. He had trampled all his feelings to pieces. He did not give the little fox behind him a trace of expectation. In the cold wind, she suddenly laughed in a low voice. There was a trace of despair in the laughter. Finally, he heard the girl behind him. Her voice was calm and cold. "Yes, master." These three simple words were distant and distant. All the feelings were withdrawn, and there was no trace of softness. When Jin Qian's footsteps paused slightly. His black eyes, which were supposed to be cold and emotionless, were now filled with endless darkness and trembling. He did this to her. There was still a trace of affection in his eyes. When Jin Qian disappeared, Wei Wei Bai calmly reached out and touched her chin. Old Monster Wen has indeed eaten a few hundred years of rice. He's so vicious when looking at people. I almost exposed myself. This was the first time she was suspected with such a sharp attitude. Her acting skills. She did use all kinds of methods to provoke his feelings. But everything she did was in line with her character. She could directly approach him and interrogate whether she was doing it on purpose. It could only be said that his personality was especially sensitive. The system was confused. So there's no way to capture him. 3 years later, the male lead will be sore, and he's planning to go into seclusion and not come out, right? Wei Wei Bai calmly said, "It's okay. Didn't he not let me flirt with him? Then I'll flirt with someone else." System, the host was going to flirt with someone else again. Wei Wei Bai said, "And feelings are so easy to control, no one would date." Old Monster Wen's favorability is definitely more than 35, but he can endure. If he could endure, he could suppress his feelings. There would not be any emotional fluctuations. The favorability indicator wouldn't have any reaction either. It was too difficult to dig out the emotional fluctuations of old immortal cultivators. His shell was terrifyingly thick. If he didn't shatter Sun Mo's outer shell, he wouldn't be able to get any favorable impression points. Wasn't the host stupid? How did he become smart again? Then, he looked at the host's appearance. The adorable look was gone. It was incomparably gorgeous. So once you're not cute, you're no longer stupid. Just as he thought of this, Wei Wei Bai's body became cute and petite again. Her curvy figure from before was gone. His face also returned to its round and cute appearance. Wei Wei Bai's gaze also changed. From sharp and shrewd, it became clear and beautiful. She reached out and touched her chin. Then, she raised her eyebrows. "Let's go." The system asked, "Where to?" Wei Wei Bai said, "Go to the latrine pit and pour everything into his lotus pond." After saying that, she glared at him fiercely. "This is revenge, to make him dislike me." Sure enough, after the host became cute, her IQ became indescribable. After spending most of the night, the system finally persuaded the stupid and adorable host. It was only 35 favorability points. Don't take revenge anymore, take revenge like this. Believe it or not, when you wake up, -35. What was the difference between this and when a boyfriend and girlfriend broke up, the girlfriend splashed feces in front of the boyfriend's door? This splashing of feces would definitely turn them into enemies. More importantly, he didn't want a host who dug up specialties in the latrine. Chapter 2394. Wei Wei Bai's soft voice was innocent and aggrieved. If you don't like me, why did you save me, Xiao Qian? When Jinqian's skin trembled and his eyelashes trembled. Sweat rolled down and wet his cheeks. There was a kind of abstinent beauty. He finally spoke, his voice cold to the bone. Don't shake my heart again. I'm afraid you'll regret it. Wei Wei Bai giggled, seductive and charming. She nestled in his arms with bad intentions. Then her red lips moved slightly, her tone was extremely sarcastic. Hypocrite, hypocrite. You want to die, but you still look so calm. You obviously have dirty thoughts when you see me. Master. The two words master. She bit him fiercely and disdainfully. But her fingers had already gone deep into his collar. And when Jinqian couldn't even raise his hands to stop her. She was his inner demon. She was an illusion created by him. But it was what he longed for the most in his heart. When Jinqian's fingers were placed on her fragile neck. He was about to pinch her. But he heard her soft and sobbing voice say, Master, I like you. I won't regret it. His fingers suddenly froze. This was his last chance, but he missed it. She had already hugged him and completely dragged him into a terrifying and deep hell. That place was hot and crazy. Desperate and twisted. Dark and greedy. However, his eyes were fixated on the white phantom. He reached out his hand and grabbed her ankle. You'll regret it. He heard himself, his voice as cold as a venomous snake, making the final judgment to her. You shouldn't have messed with me in the first place. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 40. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 50. Emotional fluctuations are at 60. All the suppressed favorable impression points exploded out. His cold shell was pried open by his inner demon. All of his hidden thoughts were exposed. When Jinqian's deep and dark eyes were stained with a bloody demonic aura. He finally took the first step into becoming a demon. Love. The system frowned when it heard the notification that the favorable impression points had exploded. Then, he glanced at Wen Jinqian's condition. However, he was blinded by a burst of golden light, as if something was blocking him from seeing his target. The system finally realized the severity of the situation. His monitor had never been broken. The only possibility was that the male lead was stronger than the monitor. That's why he couldn't peek at the male lead. It seemed that Yi Yuxuan had started to follow Wei Wei Bai into the plane, and most of his instruments were malfunctioning. It didn't matter if it was a temporary time limit, or if it was to keep an eye on the male lead, or some very important information. He couldn't get anything. If this continued, his system's functions would be screwed over by Yi Yuxuan's soul power. The system suddenly sensed something and immediately looked into the darkness. She saw Wen Jinqian standing in front of the host's bed. The young man's face was no longer as lofty and divine as it usually was. Instead, it was delicate and carried a hint of gloomy coldness. His whole body was wrapped in an indescribable gloomy coldness. His black hair was casually draped behind him, and deep in his cold eyes, there was a faint red halo. It was as clear as a gem, but there was more darkness and coldness than a gem. The young man's deep and beautiful eyes stared motionlessly at Wei Wei Bai, who was curled up into a ball under the blankets. When the little fox was sleeping, she forgot to put away her furry ears. Her tail was also raised under the blankets, looking exceptionally harmless and soft. Slash. Chapter 2395. Wei Wei Bai listened to the system. He stared at me the whole night. The system thought about it. The first half of the time, he was blocked and couldn't see anything. When he could see, Wen Jinqian did nothing but sit at the head of the bed and stare at the host. The host didn't lose any arms or legs, and her clothes were still intact. So he nodded. Yes, he stared at you the whole night. Wei Bai, then how did he look at me? With tears in his eyes, or regret rejecting me? The system was silent for a long time before finally saying, no, it was especially gloomy, like he wanted to strangle you to death. That gaze was cold, cruel, and scary. He thought that when Jin Qian had some deep hatred for the host. Wei Bai, so old monster Wen's favorability suddenly increased by so many points, then ran to her bed and stared at her with murderous eyes for the whole night. What did that mean? Wei Bai thought for a long time before she suddenly understood. He must have suddenly regretted rejecting her, but he was too embarrassed to say it. He could only increase his favorability while looking at her, the sleeping little vixen, with conflicted and hateful eyes. She nagged the system about old man Wen's psychological journey. In the end, the system expressed endless. For the sleeping little vixen. Wei Bai, at this time, we should provoke him and make him regret even more, then he will take the first step of love. After all, we have to forgive a 700-year-old otaku who has never seen a female animal before. The system felt that maybe, something was wrong. Especially when the host had a problem with her IQ, it also wanted to remind her not to take the wrong path. But after thinking about it, it couldn't say what was wrong. After all, if Yi Yuxuan's soul really followed him again, it was understandable that the favorability suddenly increased. Because the love of the soul could affect the soul fragments. It was just that the way the male lead looked at the host was too strange. The system silently flipped through the data, worried that the host with low IQ would fail and die. Su San's eyelids kept twitching. The little fox had been smiling at him for a long time. He gripped the sword in his hand and wanted to turn around and leave. However, he heard Wei Bai faintly say, I remember the time in the Imperial Pivot Hole. I was very, very scared. Su San, Wei Bai, at that time, I was all alone and had no one to rely on. I was tormented and in great pain. Su San, his fingers that were gripping the sword became even more nervous. It was indeed his fault that the little fox fell into the Dubhe hole. At that time, it was said that the little fox had fallen into the 18th level of Dubhe. If his master hadn't arrived in time, the little fox would have been dead by now. Wei Bai covered her forehead. I don't know if there are any sequelae. My heart rate has been unstable recently, and my mind is confused. I must have been scared. Su San finally moved his lips with difficulty. Think about it, what kind of compensation? After all, this matter was his fault. He shouldn't have left her behind the moment he entered the alpha hole. He wanted to scare her. In the end, she lost it. Wei Bai's eyes immediately lit up. Her round eyes were full of stars because of joy. She was so cute that Su San couldn't help but open his eyes. Then he heard the little fox say sweetly, Senior brother, will you marry me? Su San, then he thought that he was hearing things. Only then did he calm down and silently turn his head to look at the little fox whose eyes were full of joy. Chapter 2396. The little fox looked at him happily and said, You're going to marry me. Su San only felt that his throat was a little dry. For a moment, he felt that this kind of scene. It was harder to deal with than facing 10,000 enemies. The enemies just had to pull out their sword and hack them to death. But this scene was not suitable for hacking the little fox to death. Finally, the corners of his mouth twitched. You actually have a crush on me. Wei Bai smiled brightly. No, I don't like you. Su San, although he knew that it was not possible, hearing this answer was still a blow. What was going on? Wei Wei Bai's smile slowly disappeared, and a trace of sadness appeared in her eyes. Soft and round eyes, without the cute light, made people feel uncomfortable looking at them. I want to see Master. Su San lowered his eyes and was silent for a moment. You still like Master? She liked Master, who in Heaven's sect did not know. But this was impossible. Even if the threads of love were to touch the soul. Master was not affected, but the little fox seemed to be more deeply affected. Wei Wei Bai smiled helplessly, her fingers clutching the cuffs of her sleeves, and her curly silver hair scattered over her shoulders. She looked like she had been abandoned, full of decadent fragility. I don't dare to like him, but I still want to see him. He said that he would be in seclusion for 3 years, and after 3 years, he would pull out the threads of love and fly away, never to see me again. Su San immediately knew. Master was rejecting the little fox. And to make her completely give up, it was indeed something that Master would do. His previous gentleness to the little fox was abnormal. Such a cold and heartless Master was the person he influenced. But seeing Wei Wei Bai so pitiful and sad, his chest also felt stuffy. The little fox's soft and humble voice continued to sound. He said that he won't see me, so he definitely won't see me. But even if it's the last time, I still want to see him. To leave something for myself in the future. Su San frowned. Why are you so humble? He doesn't like you, so don't like him. He did not understand this kind of feeling. He also did not understand why the little fox was so humble. He did not understand why he also felt bad when he saw the little fox so sad. This kind of emotion was extremely foreign to him. Wei Wei Bai quietly lowered her head for a while before she looked up and revealed a bright and cute smile. However, his eyes were filled with sorrow. If that's the case, then it wouldn't be considered as liking me. Liking someone is uncontrollable. Su San's breathing stopped. He was silent for a long time before he said, What do you want me to do? Wei Wei Bai immediately put away her sad appearance and said with a sweet smile, When Disciple gets married, if I ask Shizhuan to come out and officiate, he won't be able to refuse. Su San thought for a while. Indeed, disciples of their generation were getting married. Even if he was in seclusion, he had a reason to ask his master to come out and preside over the wedding. This reason was particularly decent and powerful. Wei Wei Bai saw that he was silent and thought that he was worried about something. She immediately said, When Shizhuan comes out to preside over the wedding, we won't go through the last step. Then it won't be a real wedding. The last step was to press the fingerprint of the soul contract. This was a marriage tradition in the immortal cultivation world. The last step was the most important. Without the last step, it would not be considered a marriage. Su San looked at her expressionlessly and finally said, It won't be good for your reputation. After all, if the wedding contract was broken, it would be a big blow to the woman. Even if it was fake, it wouldn't be good. Wei Wei Bai's eyes softened, It's fine. I'm a fox. A fox's reputation isn't good, so it doesn't matter, //. Chapter 2397. In fact, it was just for the sake of Master, not for the sake of reputation. Su San kept these words in his mouth and did not say them out loud. In the end, his face darkened and he said coldly, Do whatever you want. After saying that, he was about to leave. However, one of her hands was grabbing the cuff of his sleeve. Su San's body stiffened, but he heard the little fox's innocent words. Before we get married, I'll have to trouble you to pretend to be an intimate couple with me for a few days. Otherwise, Master won't believe us if we suddenly get married. Su San was stiff for a long time before he finally gritted his teeth and said, Okay. He always felt like he had stepped into a fox pit and was about to fall at any time. Su-san had a bad premonition. But when he saw the little fox's round eyes looking at him longingly, he still accepted his fate and snorted. Forget it, he would just treat it as his little junior sister's first love. Then, the rumors of the Heavenly Gates sect had a new topic. Third senior brother and little junior sister confessed. Then the rumors became. Third senior brother and little junior sister fell in love. Third senior brother and little junior sister fell in love. Third senior brother and little junior sister kissed each other in the famous hot spring of the Heavenly Gates sect. Third senior brother and little junior sister finally, turned on the lights. When Su-san heard these rumors, his whole person was in a bad mood. He had only seen the little fox for 7 or 8 days. And just like the mission, they would eat together in the morning and do their own activities for the rest of the time. They would eat together at noon and eat together at night. After the mission was completed, they would go back to their rooms to sleep. What personal love, turning on the lights, falling, the things without a shadow were spread by that bastard. He would hack her to death. Then he remembered that this was the effect that the little fox wanted. He could only bear with it and swallow his anger. As for Wei Bai, who was the first to spread the rumors, her face was calm. It's been 7 or 8 days, but old Monster One is still as calm as a dog. He didn't come to watch me at night, right? System, no. But he could not see Wen Jinqian's recent situation. He could only know that he was still in seclusion in the lotus. There was no other information. The system indicated that he was about to become a good-for-nothing, so it could only take out a straw doll with the 3 words, Yi Yuxuan written on it and prick it with a needle. This would suppress Yi Yuxuan's soul power. He told him not to interfere too much with the process of conquering the world. Wei Bai snorted coldly. I told him to bear with it. In the end, he would just have to undergo ligation. It seems that the rumors are not explosive enough. Tomorrow, I will go and spread that Su-san has 2 pimples on his butt. The system was shocked. How did you know? Wei Bai, I made it up. System, is your third senior brother happy to know that you're making things up for him? He didn't know whether he was happy or not. Anyway, that night, a strange fragrance wafted over. Wei Bai fell asleep. In the darkness, the candlelight was blurry. A white figure slowly walked in from outside the door. The entire room was filled with the rich fragrance of lotus flowers. This kind of fragrance was so dense that it was ominous, making people feel uncomfortable just by smelling it. Along with the thick exotic fragrance, the young man had already arrived at the bedside. His eyes were cold, and his face was as white as jade. He was holy and beautiful. However, the lotus mark between his eyebrows had already turned red. The bright red color was unusually strange. The redness in Wen Jinqian's eyes deepened. It was so thick that it was like soaking in blood, making people's scalps tingle. In the past, he looked like an unattainable cloud, without human feelings. Now, he had the smell of smoke and fire. Chapter 2398. Amidst the smoke and fire, that indifferent face appeared much more demonic. He reached out his beautiful fingertips and slowly touched Wei Bai's face. Her sleeping appearance was devoid of the sadness from before. Instead, it was sweet, soft, and relaxed. Was it because she had a new lover? Wen Jinqian's eyes darkened, and he couldn't help but pinch hard. Wei Bai trembled. It hurt from his pinch. He gently relaxed his fingers before she calmed down. The youth slowly revealed a smile. The fox's habit is really to like the new and dislike the old. The muttered words lost their cold aloofness. Instead, it was mixed with a low and cold sneer. You like someone else? Rumors came one after another. They spread to his ears through various plants. His restless heart, which could turn into a demon at any moment, could no longer calm down. The color of the lotus kept darkening. Just like his demonic thoughts about her kept deepening. When Jinqian slowly bent down and leaned close to her. His breath was gentle, but his eyes were extremely cold. Your love for others is just an illusion. It's not worth mentioning. His soft voice was like an evil whisper from the dark night. The demonic thoughts in his heart kept urging him to do something that would make her feel pain. He was expressionless. He reached out his fingertips and gently pressed them against her lips, rubbing them on hurriedly. It was as if he was checking something. Fortunately, there's no aura of others. The redness in his eyes faded a little. But he still couldn't stop his despicable behavior in the dark night. He knew what it was like to be possessed. It was like the last time he was possessed and tortured in his birthplace. This time, he was confused because of his feelings and was disturbed by the demonic thoughts. When Jinqian sat by her pillow with a calm expression. His black hair was casually scattered, and under the messy hair was a pair of red eyes. It was terrifying and exquisite. It was morbid and demonic. He was silent for a long time before he finally lowered his head and suppressed his urge to be possessed. He just wanted a simple kiss on her body. He couldn't think anymore. He ordered himself to wake up from his possessed state. 700 years of calmness had suppressed the urge to explode within his body. Just as he pulled away from her lips, a pair of hands wrapped around his neck and hugged him. The little fox was in a deep sleep, but it still instinctively hugged something warm nearby. She even closed her eyes comfortably and rubbed her face against his delicate and fair cheeks as if she was rubbing against a piece of warm jade. When Jinqian leaned forward and pressed his face against her, his body did not move at all. He suppressed the darkness in his eyes and quietly stared at her. After a while, she finally got tired of hugging him. Her hands fell limply, and she turned around to continue hugging the quilt. A furry tail emerged, and white fur fluttered in the air. When Jinqian lowered his eyes and looked at her quietly for a while. Finally, he reached out and touched her tail. Just like that, the wanton darkness slowly settled down. When Jinqian's beautiful and ominous red eyes gradually returned to their original black color. It was the red lotus between her eyebrows because she was in love. But it was still gorgeous. He gently stroked her tail and looked at her sleeping appearance. His expression finally relaxed. Just now, he was possessed again. In a state of uncontrollable state, he had a dark desire to destroy this woman. An endless possessiveness. This was not right, but... He calmed down, but his clear and dark eyes did not leave her face. In the end, he did not lose control. And he did not become possessed. He gently lowered his head and kissed the corner of her lips. After 700 years of cultivation, he suddenly encountered the most terrifying obstacle of love when he was about to arrive in Soar. He did not like it. But he could not escape for the time being. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 65. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on Chapter 2399. When Jinqian's favorability had increased by 65 points since that night. He went into seclusion again. He didn't come out at night. He seemed to have found a way to suppress himself. He wouldn't be confused by rumors. No matter how long the rumors about Wei Wei Bai and Su San spread outside. He pretended not to hear them. Wei Wei Bai was so annoyed that her ears and tail popped out again. Her silver hair fell, her pointed ears drooped, and she had a bored expression. Su San also had a bored expression. He was expressionless and wanted to cut whoever he saw. The recent rumors were becoming more and more unreliable. If he found out who dared to spread rumors about him and the little fox, he would cut that person into 1,000 pieces. Seeing the little fox drooping her ears, he raised his eyebrows and was silent for a while before saying, "Master doesn't want to see you for your own good. Otherwise, you should give up." The rumors were so ugly now. If they were to get married and break off the engagement at the last minute, would she still want her reputation in the future? These days, he really experienced the horror of rumors. Even the false could be said to be true. Also, the little fox's tribe had a bad reputation. It didn't matter if his reputation was ruined. He was a man anyway. But the little fox would be prejudiced by people who would call her a fox spirit. This fake marriage would do her no good. Wei Wei Bai's ears perked up and fell back down. She raised a pair of large, moist eyes and stared at him in a daze. Su San's breathing stopped when he saw her stare. Then the little fox pursed her lips. "I want him. I want to see him." Su San didn't know why, but there was a suffocating feeling in his heart. He gritted his teeth and said coldly, "Up to you. You'll regret it if your reputation is ruined." The little fox said softly, "Compared to seeing him, reputation is not important." Su San, he couldn't chat with the love brain. Their brain circuits were different. But seeing the little fox so dispirited, Su San still endured. In the end, he said, "Forget it. We'll get married, but don't make a big fuss. We'll pretend to kneel outside the main hall and then lie to Master that we want to get married." Wei Wei Bai nodded listlessly. She was not happy at all. Su San frowned and finally reached out to ruffle her hair. He was incomparably rude. "What's so good about liking someone? Look at me. If any woman dares to approach me, I'll kick her away. I don't like women." Wei Wei Bai said faintly, "Then do you like men?" Su San, after a long silence, he noticed that the little fox was looking at him with an even stranger expression. Su San immediately said, "I don't like men. I like my sword." He was a sword cultivator, so of course he only liked swords. The look in the little fox's eyes became even stranger, as if it was looking at a pervert. "Oh, you like your sword." He didn't like people, but he liked weapons. This was the legendary perverted fetish. "Su San, why do I feel like the little fox's gaze is even more strange?" Wei Wei Bai and Su San agreed to meet at the entrance of the main hall tomorrow. He pretended to let his master know the date of their wedding. If he still couldn't see Master, they could only hold a wedding. Su San did not know why he could indulge the little fox so much. Could it be guilt? He did not think deeply about it and instinctively avoided this question. To make the effect more realistic, Wei Wei Bai suggested that they look at the fountain together. There was a hot spring group at the peak of the Heavenly Gates sect. There were also hot springs to look at. When the sun was good, one could even see a rainbow. Many immortal couples specially came to the Heavenly Gates sect to look at it. After a long time, everyone knew that this was a holy land for love. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the Chapter 2400. Su San held his sword expressionlessly and came here. The little fox also had a bitter expression on her face as she muttered, "Master, I miss you so much." The system had never seen a pair of pretending to be a couple that could be so perfunctory. Those who didn't know would think that the two of them had a grudge. The fountain was indeed very beautiful. The rainbow appeared several times. Even Su San and Wei Wei Bai's minds were not here. So the atmosphere was abnormally cold. Suddenly, a burst of hot spring splashed towards them. It was like a heavy rainstorm. Su San frowned and was about to draw his sword to block all the water droplets. But when the little fox retreated, she accidentally stepped on his foot. His mind was in a daze. The hot spring water had already soaked the two of them. Wei Wei Bai's silver fur softened. Wet droplets fell from her eyelashes. It was unspeakably pitiful. Su-san, then he turned his back. The little fox's skirt outlined the lines of her body. Although he couldn't see anything, he still avoided suspicion. Then, he thought of something and took out a clean, large robe from his storage pouch. He reached out his hand and said calmly without looking at her, "Put it on, let's go back." After all, it was not suitable for her to go back with her clothes wet. He also wanted to use his spiritual energy to dry her. But this technique was more intimate. The spiritual energy would directly touch the skin. He was afraid of offending her, so he simply didn't touch her or look at her. Although the little fox was a fox, she was pure and didn't know anything about the world. As her senior brother, he couldn't when she didn't know anything. He treated her casually. In some aspects, Su-san was still very protective. Behind him came the sound of Wei Wei Bai putting on the clothes. Su-san pursed his lips and was silent for a while before saying softly, "Okay, let's go." Wei Wei Bai obediently put on his clothes and went back. This was an accident. Even Wei Wei Bai didn't think much of it. And after returning, she directly returned the clothes to Su-san. The two of them agreed to go to the entrance of the main hall tomorrow. Then they parted ways. Wei Wei Bai also discussed eccentric Wen's character with the system. Then, after making a follow-up plan, she went to sleep. She thought that old monster Wen would not come for a while. In the middle of the night, a hazy figure appeared beside her bed. When Jinqian stood quietly by the bed with his hands behind his back. The redness in his eyes was barely noticeable. During this period of time, he had used up all of the lotus-purified water. He finally suppressed his evil thoughts towards her. His demonized state was getting better by the day. Soon, he would be able to completely calm down. When the time came, he would slowly deal with his feelings for her. He had originally wanted to take a look at her before leaving. However, after when Jinqian stood there for a while, a strange fluctuation suddenly appeared in his calm eyes. The little fox's aura was strangely clean. She had long worn the lotus dress he had made. Her body was filled with the fragrance of lotus flowers. Incomparably pure. But today, her aura was in chaos. When Jinqian was expressionless, but his eyes turned cold. His fingertips fell on her clothes, but he didn't move. Instead, it was silent for a long time before he lowered his head and gently sniffed her neck. The immortal aura of the lotus, the soft fragrance of her body. There was also a trace of someone else's aura. Was it Su-san's? When Jinqian's black eyes were gradually dyed with a strange redness. He didn't say anything, nor did he move. He just sat by the bed and stared at her without moving. Until the third petal of the 5 petals of the lotus flower between his eyebrows was gradually dyed red by the evil thoughts. Chapter 2401. As for his eyes, they had also turned from black to bright red. This was the sign of demonic thoughts invading his bones. If it was just love before, the first step to becoming a demon, there was still time to redeem it. But now it was getting deeper and deeper. When Jinqian closed his eyes indifferently and depressingly, his fingers fell on her curly silver hair and gently stroked it. It was unbelievably gentle. But for some reason, it gave people a cold and evil atmosphere. The system that stayed up all night, although it was not blocked tonight. But it seemed like nothing had happened. Because the male lead had been sitting on the bed, staring at Wei Wei Bai with red eyes the whole night. In the end, he was so tired that he closed his eyes. The system was deeply suspicious. What was the male lead doing? Just looking at her. If looks could kill, Wei Wei Bai would have been riddled with holes by him. And his eyes had turned red. Was it really that enraged when enemies met? So it was because he was angry and wanted to kill the host that his eyes turned red? The system could not spy on the male lead's information. Now it was also confused. In addition, he had been staying up all night because of the limited time for his handiwork. This caused his brain to be a little slow. Then, just when he thought when Jin Qian was going to do something big, he left. So the next day, the host woke up and asked, "Did old Tortoise One come?" He answered calmly, "He came and left." Wei Wei Bai, the system, nothing happened, don't worry. Wei Wei Bai, that's why I'm worried. How long has it been since this little demon's favorability increased? It was already hard enough to attack from a distance. She even met a thick-skinned old monster. 65 favorability was still love even if they did not love each other to the death. Why did old monster one not feel jealous or emotional? What was the difference between this and attacking a rock? No, it was even harder than attacking a rock. A rock could still be warm in one's arms. Old monster one would only hide far away, you old bastard. Wei Wei Bai could only angrily put on her makeup and put on her best dress. She even specially braided her silver hair into a beautiful headband and wore a small bell unique to the Fox clan. When Wei Wei Bai appeared in front of Su San, Su San was stunned. The girl's ears and fox were tucked away, and her beautiful pale pupils were as clear as sweet sugar water. The bell-like hair ornament had a tassel of flowers hanging from it. It was exceptionally beautiful. However, he was not as stunning as the girl who had dressed up. She was wearing a long silver dress, and her lips were pursed, bright red. The combination of white and red added a soul-stirring seductiveness to her cuteness. She was still young. Wait until she grew up. He didn't know how good it would become. Wei Wei Bai looked at him strangely. Don't I look good? Su San opened his eyes, looking somewhat disheveled. It's all right. Wei Wei Bai immediately said with a heartless smile, then let's go report to Shizhuan. Was he so happy because he could get close to Master? Su San frowned but didn't say anything. The two of them arrived outside the main hall. The red-crowned crane guarded the entrance of the main hall, not allowing them to enter. It seems that Shizhuan is in seclusion and can't be disturbed. Su San thought that he could at least enter the main hall to report. He saw that the little fox was a little listless with its head down, as if it was beaten. Su San sighed. He felt that if he didn't solve the little fox's obsession, in the future, cultivation would also become a terrible inner demon. Unable to improve. People who cultivated knew how terrible it was to become a demon. And the inner demon came from not being able to get what one wanted. Chapter 2402. If this obsession was not resolved, no matter how many years had passed, he would face it every time he went through a cultivation tribulation. He could only reach out and pull Wei Wei Bai's sleeve, then indicate for her to kneel in front of the hole. The little fox obediently followed suit. Su San's face was indifferent, but he felt that his mood was not right, so he could only reveal a stiff smile. Then he indicated for the little fox to smile as well. Wei Wei Bai immediately revealed a brilliant smile, as sweet as it could be. The corner of Su San's mouth twitched, and then he could only brace himself and do it. After bowing according to the rules, he said in a clear voice, "Disciple Su San and junior sister Lan Qi are in love, and are willing to become cultivation companions. I specially came to ask Master to be the witness of our wedding." After saying that, he even used his elbow to nudge the little fox. Let her accept. Wei Wei Bai immediately nodded seriously. Master, please be the witness. Finished speaking. The two knelt alone in front of the door. The red-crowned crane seemed to have sensed something, and suddenly trembled, using its wings to cover its head. Su-san also felt that there was a huge and cold force in the air. His long sword faintly felt uneasy. This uneasiness came from killing intent. Su-san frowned. The killing intent came from, inside the hall, from the lotus pond. Even if it did not agree, there should not be killing intent. Wei Wei Bai still had a dazed expression. This level of killing intent. To her, she actually did not feel anything. That cold killing intent pressed down layer by layer. It made Su-san start to break out in cold sweat, his mind trembling, and his muscles starting to tremble. A huge pain made his face turn pale. The killing intent had already turned into a sword, stirring up his spiritual energy pool. Even if Su-san had such a strong physique, he could not kneel for a while. Su-san was in unbearable pain, and looked at the little fox somewhat worriedly. But he saw that Wei Wei Bai's eyes were clear and ignorant, and there was nothing strange about her kneeling obediently. This killing intent was directed at him. Su-san finally realized that when Jin Qian in the lotus pond was angry. No, it should be said that he was angry and had killing intent. As a sword cultivator, he was very sensitive to such emotions. This cold, evil, and murderous aura filled with violence should not belong to Wen Jinqian. The immortal cultivators close to Soar had such intense emotional fluctuations. Could it be? Su-san looked into the main hall in disbelief. In the lotus pond, the lotus was still blooming. However, the nearly colorless lotus had an additional touch of bright red. The reflection of the pool made it look exceptionally strange and beautiful. Su-san's lips trembled for a moment before he immediately looked at the little fox and said, "Let's go, Shizuen is possessed." If an immortal cultivator of this level were to turn into a devil, if they were not careful, they would be killed by Wen Jinqian, who had lost his mind. The little fox's eyes widened, bedevilment. The system suddenly came to a realization. Holy shit, he's possessed. No wonder she glared at the host with red eyes every day. It was easy to explain why he had entered the demonic path. Wei Wei Bai, on the other hand, thought of the place where Wen Jinqian had tortured her for more than 600 years because he had turned into a demon. Old Monster Wen was extremely perverse when he was possessed. He didn't recognize anyone. It was as twisted as it could be. Su-san could not stand up. The murderous aura made his blood surge, and a mouthful of blood overflowed from the corner of his mouth. He said in a low voice with difficulty, "Shizuen has locked onto me now. You go first and find the other senior brothers. Let them suppress Shizuen's demonic thoughts." The little fox looked at him blankly. She suddenly asked, "Is it very painful to turn into a demon?" Su-san nodded. Shizuen definitely can't control himself now. Of course he's in a lot of pain. Wei Wei Bai stared blankly at the lotus pond. Su-san immediately shouted angrily, "Do you want to kill Shizuen? Don't waste time, go quickly." Wei Wei Bai immediately jumped up, turned around, and ran out. The red-crowned crane suddenly let out a sharp cry. Su-san also spat out a mouthful of blood. He had no choice but to pull out his sword and withstand the severe pain that entered his bones and marrow. But the moment he pulled out his sword, the lotus fragrance in the air became stronger. In the strange fragrance, a slender white figure slowly appeared in the main hall. The youth's black hair hung down to his waist. He was barefoot, and the eyes under his long and narrow eyelashes were pure and evil. But his expression was still pure and indifferent. If it wasn't for the violent aura around him and the color of his eyes, he didn't look like he had turned into a demon at all. Su-san looked at him in confusion, his voice trembling. "Shizuen, what's wrong with you? When Jin Qian looked indifferently in the direction that Wei Wei Bai left. The repressed killing intent was still cutting into Su San. Then, just when Su San was about to collapse, he calmly lowered his eyes. The deep red light in his eyes gave people a scalp-numbing feeling. You and Xiaoqi want to get married? Su San nodded instinctively. But he suddenly realized something. He looked up and saw Wen Jinqian's finger lightly pointing at him. That was a golden power. If it penetrated his forehead, his soul would immediately scatter. Su San wanted to escape, but he was firmly bound in place by a huge force. Before he was on the verge of death, he heard Wen Jinqian's indifferent voice, mixed with a gloomy and tyrannical tone. Unfortunately, I don't agree. /fast full text / fast download fast to facilitate your next reading. You can click on the fast. Chapter 2403. This sentence was like a terrible death notice. The cold and sharp spiritual energy instantly rolled over Su San's natal sword, and the boiling killing intent made the sword begin to let out a tragic scream. Su San only felt that his internal organs were all stirred into a ball. He said in a trembling voice, Master. The sect leader suddenly becoming a demon was simply terrible news for the entire Heavenly Gate sect. Before Su San was crushed by the darkness, his only thought was. Fortunately, the little fox ran fast. He could still hold off his master for a while, but the little fox would probably be killed by this violent murderous aura in the blink of an eye. When Jin Qian heard Su San's call, he was a little indifferent and tilted his head strangely. His red eyes were ignorant and demonic. He actually looked a little cute. He seemed to have thought of something. His red eyes revealed a sense of pure innocence. Was he so deeply possessed that he didn't even have reason? Su San's heart turned cold. Such a master was simply the most terrifying weapon in the world. Even if he slaughtered the entire Heavenly Gate sect, no one could stop him. When Jin Qian thought for a moment, but his mind was blank. There was a dark red color in front of him. A violent killing intent surged in his heart. If he was possessed before, he could still maintain a little rationality. Last night, the aura that belonged to someone else on Wei Wei Bai's body became the last straw that completely crushed him. This kind of aura became the most terrifying part of his obsession. It was jealousy. He suppressed himself and made himself give up his obsession with her. But the inner demon still used the terrifying jealousy to completely swallow his reason. Even if the little fox didn't belong to anyone else now, she would still be with someone else in the future. In the world of cultivation, time was long. Everyone would experience the company of others. He was alone. From birth to soar, he was alone. In his lonely life, he only had one fox. Stumbling, incomparably naive, turned into a ball of fire and became his empty heart. The only thing she had was a warm obsession. Now it was gone. When Jin Qian slowly lowered his eyes, the red eyes under his eyelashes were deep and pure, beautiful and cold. He looked at Su San as though he was looking at a dead object. He raised his beautiful finger, and with a trace of golden light, it entered his sea of consciousness. This person. He couldn't remember who it was. She only remembered that she hated him. Especially his aura. Therefore, it was better to eliminate him. Suddenly, a hand gently tugged at his sleeve, and a soft voice sounded. It made him stop all his movements. Master. When Jin Qian's fingers paused, something flashed through his blank mind. But he only felt incomparable pain. He couldn't remember anything. He only instinctively turned around to look. However, he saw a beautiful girl standing behind him. Her fingers were tightly gripping his sleeve, and her pair of light-colored eyes were filled with tears. Her face was pale, and her lips were trembling. Her voice was sweet and hoarse with a trace of pain. "Master, what happened to you?" Standing beside Wen Jinqian, she could feel the spirit qi erupting from his body. This made Wei Weibai feel very uncomfortable. She was only a little apprentice at the foundation establishment stage. When this kind of incomparably huge immortal cultivator Big Shot was enraged, it overflowed with anger. It was enough to kill her. However, she didn't shrink back. Instead, she gently tilted her head, and the small bell on her headdress. The tinkling sound of the bell was exceptionally cute. She revealed a pale but exceptionally beautiful smile. "Master, I finally see you again." Chapter 2404. When Jinqian's fingers trembled, and the spiritual energy in his hand disappeared. His blank mind seemed to be at a loss. The spiritual energy around him couldn't be retracted in time and rushed into Wei Weibai's body. She groaned, and the skin on her wrist burst out with blood. Her beautiful and delicate skin was badly mutilated. It was a ghastly sight. Su San, who was lying on the ground vomiting blood, looked up and saw Wei Weibai's wound. His pupils shrank. He immediately wanted to get up and push Wei Weibai away. "Let her leave here." But before he could stand up, Wen Jinqian suddenly retracted all his spiritual energy. White immortal energy also surrounded him in an instant. The youth was as holy as an immortal, and a trace of confusion appeared on his incomparably beautiful face. He stared blankly at the wound on Wei Weibai's wrist. An uncomfortable feeling appeared in his blank mind. Was he the one who hurt her? The youth was slightly clumsy and carefully reached out to hold her arm. Wei Weibai frowned. Just now, he really rushed over without any protection. After all, this degree of wound didn't require any life support. It was okay to save some life points and give the system some snacks. Although it still hurt. Suddenly, she paused. The youth in front of her, who had already been possessed, gently lowered his head. His eyelashes trembled slightly, and the hostility in his red eyes had turned into innocent childishness. His thin red lips softly touched her wrist. Blood gushed out of the wound on her wrist. The girl's pain was also transmitted through her trembling skin. A trace of throbbing appeared in Wen Jinqian's blank red eyes. Golden spiritual aura warmly entered her wound from his lips. In the blink of an eye, the skin on her wrist returned to normal. Only some residual red blood was left. Wen Jinqian frowned as if he wasn't very satisfied. With a somewhat innocent expression, he stuck out the tip of his tongue and licked the blood. Wei Weibai trembled and felt a numbing sensation rush directly to her head. Her deathly pale face had a tinge of redness. "Master, I'm fine, let go of me." This position was too ambiguous. The youth lowered his head and kissed her wrist, but his expression was unusually pure. When Jinqian didn't want to let go of her. He instinctively wanted to get close to her. But another kind of throbbing made him obediently let go of her hand. He was like a child facing a kindergarten teacher. He obediently let go of her hand and then lowered his head to look at her. She seemed to think that she was very obedient. It was a reward for being able to get a little bit of affection from someone. Wei Weibai looked at Su San with a strange expression. Su San had stopped vomiting blood and looked at Wen Jinqian with a strange expression. Then he looked at the little fox. He saw that the little fox was just like him, with a face full of doubt. Su San finally thought of something and looked at Wen Jinqian's wrist. Sure enough, a red mark appeared on his wrist. This was the manifestation of the power of the threads of love. Qing Si had always been suppressed by her master's power. If master wasn't in love, it wouldn't have appeared. And its biggest side effect was to make a man who was in love listen to a woman's words. So this is, Su San looked at the pure and innocent Wen Jinqian in disbelief. Master, he, Su San looked at the little fox again and found that she didn't seem to have thought of the threads of love. She was even bold and reached out to grab Master's sleeve. It seemed that she could see Master. To the little fox, this was enough. The little fox had been causing trouble for so long. Wasn't it just to see Master? He thought that it wouldn't be difficult to help the little fox achieve her wish. But no one thought that Master would be in love. He was even possessed. Chapter 2405. No wonder just now, Master caught him and wanted to kill him. This was simply the attitude of a jealous man who wanted to kill his love rival. Wei Wei Bai saw that Wen Jinqian's state was not quite right. She called him carefully, Master. Wen Jinqian looked up, and a trace of innocence appeared in his beautiful eyes. Yes. Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips and carefully probed. Do you know who I am? Wen Jinqian looked at her silently, and a trace of twisted and crazy emotions suddenly appeared in his calm eyes. His expression turned cold. The spiritual energy in the air faintly fluctuated. Wei Wei Bai trembled as if she had been stung by the spiritual energy. The spiritual energy immediately calmed down. It was as if the fluctuation just now was just an illusion. When Jinqian saw that she was frowning in pain, and a trace of helplessness immediately flashed in his eyes. He grabbed her wrist, and his tone was solemn and slow. You are mine. Wei Wei Bai, she felt that the possessed Wen Jinqian had returned to his original state and become stupid. Seeing that she did not answer, Wen Jinqian pursed his thin lips, and the hostility in his eyes appeared again. His voice turned cold. You are mine. Wei Wei Bai trembled and blinked innocently. I am your disciple. Wen Jinqian tried hard to think about what she meant. Then he corrected her seriously. No matter what, you are mine. This sentence was his obsession. His mind was empty, and nothing could be stored inside. Only the reminder of his heart made him have an idea that he could not cling to. She was his. She should be his. No one could take her away. She only had his scent on her. Who dared to touch her? He would destroy anyone. Su San, who was lying on the ground speechlessly, suddenly trembled again. He felt that the gloomy murderous aura had appeared again. Wei Wei Bai saw that he was angry again and could not help but take a step back. However, he immediately grabbed her arm and imprisoned her. He lowered his eyes, and the red eyes under his eyelashes were as clear as gemstones. Where are you going? He seemed to be afraid that she would leave. If it wasn't because Su San was here, Wei Wei Bai would have broken her persona and started to crazily increase her favorability. But it didn't work. The little fox's innocent, cute, pure, and beautiful persona. He couldn't let that happen. Therefore, she could only lower her head, her ears soft under the silvery hair. He was frightened just now and his ears popped out again. Her tone was bitter. Shizhuan, you're sick right now. Shall we go see a doctor? When Jinqian stared blankly at her ears. After enduring for a while, he finally reached out and gently touched his ear. Wei Wei Bai's ears perked up. She raised her head and looked at him with sparkling eyes. When Jinqian also looked at her innocently. He didn't seem to know what he was doing. Not waiting for Bai Weiwei to protest, his hand rubbed her hair even harder. That furry feeling made Wen Jinqian squint his eyes. Her hair, which she had painstakingly dressed up, was in a mess again. Weiwei Bai was speechless. She took a step back again. Wen Jinqian's expression was calm, but he stubbornly took a step forward. Just like that, step by step. She was about to leave the hole, when Jinqian suddenly thought of something. His eyes narrowed violently. You want to run away from me? How did he see through it? She actually wanted to test how stupid Wen Jinqian was. She originally wanted to turn around and see if Wen Jinqian would do the same. It was really rare to see such a stupid and adorable Wen Jinqian. Before she could explain, a strong gust of wind violently threw Su San, who was on the ground, out. // to make it easier for you to read it next time, you can click. Chapter 2406. The entrance of the main hall was huge and heavy. It was a spirit stone door that never needed to be closed. Under the huge force, it closed with a bang. Su San clutched his chest. When he looked up with difficulty, he saw the huge door closed. There was a huge spirit chi array on this door. At present, no one could open it except for Master. From the time it was built, it had never been closed. The purpose of this door was to prevent the Heavenly Gate sect from declining in the future and being besieged on the mountain. It could only be built if the disciples could protect the sect. Once it was closed, even if the 10 major cultivation sects gathered, they probably wouldn't be able to open it after 100 years. The little fox was still inside. This was the only thought in Su San's mind. His master had entered the demonic path, and now he looked very calm. But if he suddenly exploded, the little fox would definitely die. He staggered up, pulled out his sword, and fiercely slashed with a sword that stunned all living beings. The sword light was like a rainbow. But the result was cruel. A wave of spirit energy fluctuation was emitted from the door, and all the attacks were swallowed up. Su San stood in front of the door in a daze. He moved his lips. Finally, he whispered softly, "Little Seven." He didn't know when it started, but the eyesore finally disappeared. When Jinqian's lips that were pursed in displeasure finally relaxed, he lowered his eyes and saw the bell on her head. Something seemed to flash through his mind. It seemed that she usually didn't dress up. So was she dressing up for that eyesore just now? Hostility immediately surged up. He immediately angrily reached out and took out the flower hairpin and bell on her head. Then, he threw them far away. The bell fell to the ground. It made a crisp sound. Wei Bai. When Jinqian suddenly became an old and childish child. Then, he lowered his head, as if declaring sovereignty, and reached out to hold her face. There was a pure obsession in her beautiful red eyes. You're not allowed to look at others in the future. After saying that, he frowned and tried to emphasize. You can only look at me. The girl's soft face was deformed by his pinch. His face was reflected in her big, clean eyes, serious and pure. Suddenly, he heard her mutter something. His eardrums trembled. She said, "I've always been looking at you." When Jinqian stared at her blankly for a while and suddenly let go of her face. His fair face was tinged with a faint blush. Wei Bai finally managed to save her face. She rubbed her cheeks helplessly and spoke in a slightly aggrieved tone. "I don't want to look at anyone else. You're the only one I want to see." Her words softened his heart. When Jinqian lowered his eyelashes to hide the shyness in his red eyes, he felt his heartbeat quicken. The lotus flowers in the pond also shook their stems and leaves, as if they were also shy. Suddenly, Wei Bai felt her cheeks warm up. The youth beside her actually lowered his head and gently kissed her on the cheek. She looked over in surprise. However, she saw that when Jinqian had already straightened up and put his hands behind his back, not daring to look at her. At the same time, the favorability notification rang out. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 70. Wei Weibai said, Tongzi, what I can't believe is that when other people turn into demons, they'll do it day and night. Why is Wen Jinqian so? System, mentally retarded. Wei Weibai was silent. This description was too harsh. He was just a little stupid, but not mentally retarded. However, there were benefits to having a low IQ. It was easy to capture him. Wei Weibai rolled her eyes and a wicked smile appeared. She turned around and said with a smile, Master, lower your head. When Jinqian obediently lowered his head and looked at her with clear eyes. She had already stood on tiptoe and planted a gentle kiss on his cheek. She was like a demon seducing a pure immortal. Chapter 2407. Her master stared at her blankly, not knowing what a bad thing was. The cold and adorable young man just calmly lowered his head, then reached out again and rubbed her ear. Then, he said unhurriedly, Okay. Wei Weibai, why did this stupid old demon find him cute? Wasn't acting cute a specialty of hers in this world? And why did he keep pulling on her ear and touching it? Were her ears very nice to touch? Wei Weibai reached out and touched her own ear in confusion. It was fluffy and nothing special. But the next second, when Jinqian grabbed her hand, he lowered his eyes and looked at her seriously. His red eyes were beautiful and pure. This is mine. Wei Weibai, then she finally reacted. Can't I touch it? When Jinqian frowned and thought for a long time. Then, he pursed his lips and said with some heartache, You can touch it for a while. Just a while. Wei Weibai seemed to have realized something. She touched her face with her fingers. When Jinqian continued to grab her hand. This is mine too. If you want to touch it, you have to get my permission. God, your grandpa. She wanted to touch her own face, but she had to get permission from someone else. Wei Weibai struggled. She broke free from his fingers and touched her lips with her delicate fingertips. But the moment her fingertips touched her lips. When Jinqian grabbed her fingers unhurriedly. He looked calm and serious. She couldn't tell that he was doing something so childish. Wei Weibai pursed her lips and glared at him unhappily. Then, she suddenly put her fingers under her neck. Then, her round eyes narrowed provocatively. But when Jinqian was still calm, persistent, and childish. He held her fingers on her collarbone. He grabbed it gently. He repeated softly, This is mine too. You're not allowed to touch it. Wei Weibai was unhappy. If everything is yours, then I don't have anything. When Jinqian was stunned. His red eyes were confused. He looked at the little fox who was looking at him pitifully. He seemed to think that he had gone too far. Everything was his. The little fox had nothing. He thought for a long time. His calm and puzzled expression was unbelievably gentle. Then, under the confused gaze of the little fox, he put her hand on his chest. His eyes were clear and serious, his tone solemn. This is yours. Wei Weibai, afraid that she didn't understand, he repeated, I'm yours. 1 for 1. This way, she wouldn't have nothing. Bai Weiwei was finally sure. When Jinqian is a fool, Tongzi. The system didn't dare to say anything. Host, you don't look very smart. The two of them were on the verge of mental retardation, and their combined age was 1,000 years old. The system was tired of their childishness. Finally, when Jinqian thought of something. He stared at Bai Weiwei quietly. He finally asked, What bad things are we going to do? Bai Weiwei. Ha! What? She was just testing whether he was stupid or not. they didn't have to do anything bad. After all, it wasn't nice to do this now. Most importantly, when Jinqian couldn't be obsessed forever. Wait until he woke up. If he remembered how stupid he was now. His affection for her didn't increase. It was good enough that he didn't rub her on the ground, skin her, and roast her into fox jerky. To make it easier for you to read it next time, you can click. Chapter 2408. After Wei Wei Bai finished teasing him, she said calmly, I forgot. As soon as she said this, when Jinqian was stunned and seemed a little disappointed. Then he softened his voice. Then think about it again. Wei Wei Bai lifted the ends of her hair and curled it. I can't remember. When Jinqian looked at her quietly for a while and then seemed to think of something. He ran his fingers through her messy silver hair and gently pressed on the back of her delicate neck, forcing her to look up. Then he lowered his head and gently kissed her with his soft thin lips. He left as soon as he touched her. The fragrance of the lotus around them became stronger. The young man's voice was a little soft and embarrassed. Is it this kind of thing? Wei Wei Bai looked at him in shock. Wasn't he stupid? Why was he so familiar and natural when he was doing bad things? Wei Wei Bai was about to say something when Jinqian held her face and asked seriously, is that so? Her eyes looked even rounder and brighter with his hand on her face. She felt that if she didn't nod, she would probably be questioned by this mentally retarded child non-stop. She could only nod her head. When Jinqian was satisfied, he let go of her face and said with a smile, I like to do bad things. Let's do it often in the future, okay? Wei Wei Bai, when Jinqian was still smiling. Okay. The possessed Wen Jinqian. It was like a terrifying repeater. Wei Wei Bai could only nod again. Okay. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 75. Wei Wei Bai. The favorability had increased just like that. It was so easy to gain favorability from the mentally retarded one. After the mentally retarded one became possessed, his entire state was wrong. Even though Wei Wei Bai's IQ had dropped recently, it was not as terrible as the mentally retarded one's. It was like an IQ avalanche. Wei Wei Bai was carried back to the lotus by Wen Jinqian. Compared to the last time, the lotus heaven and earth was completely different. Last time, the cold and distant space had the same temperament as Wen Jinqian. But now, everything was decorated with jewels, and even the carpet was furry. There were no more books, only flowers. There was also a terrifyingly large bed, covered with a red wedding blanket and pink gauze curtains. What the hell is this cheap Taobao style? The only thing that didn't change was the lotus flowers that grew everywhere. When Jinqian also looked around and waved his finger gently. Another structure was changed. The style became even more childish and cute. Then, he looked at Wei Wei Bai with his bright red eyes. Do you like it? Wei Wei Bai, I don't like it. When Jinqian frowned when she didn't respond. He asked calmly, you don't like it? Wei Wei Bai was about to nod and ask him to return the style. However, he suddenly discovered that the spiritual energy in the air had suddenly become violent. The surroundings were on the verge of collapse, so all the decorations began to crumble. This was destructive power. Wei Wei Bai immediately said, I like it very much. When Jinqian's eyes immediately relaxed. He smiled and said, yes, I knew you liked it. The air immediately calmed down. The places where the cracks had appeared were immediately mended. Although the possessed Wen Jinqian was mentally retarded, he was still a mentally retarded person who wasn't easy to bully. However, compared to the time when he tortured the entire town for more than 600 years, she felt that his current possessed state was too sweet. Wei Wei Bai hesitantly reached out her claws and gently grabbed his sleeve. Master, should we go out and take a look? To read the full article at https://www.sashu.com to read on. Calm. Chapter 2409. She always felt that the retarded Wen Jinyan was too obsessed. She was worried that he would suddenly explode and die together with her. She could go out to see the doctor and make sure that there was no danger before coming back. When Jin Qian tilted his head and looked at her quietly. Then he repeated slowly. Go out and take a look. Wei Wei Bai nodded. When Jin Qian suddenly smiled. A kind of agitated madness erupted in the depths of his cold red eyes. His smile was cold and evil. Go out. He took his time and reached out to hold her waist. His other hand gently stroked her long hair. The cold smile on his lips had a hint of teasing malevolence. Wei Wei Bai looked at his handsome face. His thin lips moved slightly. The smell of the lotus flower was terrifying. You can't go out in this lifetime. Wei Wei Bai's lips trembled. She saw him reach out his wrist. The red line on his wrist made a mark on his wrist. His body was very strong. The power that could leave a mark on his body was very scary. But he didn't feel anything at all. His fingertips were like snakes. Slowly and with a little strength, he moved from her hair to her cute and beautiful face and rubbed it. After all, how can I let others see you? Even if Wen Jinqian was crazy, he was still not easy to fool. He wanted his possession to leave. Even if he had to torture her 1,000 times in hell, he wouldn't let her go. The obsession of being crazy was much more powerful than love. A cold chain suddenly appeared in Wen Jinqian's hand. Wei Wei Bai and the system, they hadn't seen this thing for a long time. Suddenly, they didn't recognize it. When Jin Qian looked innocent and calm. He gently held her wrist and tied it. The thin chain was unusually beautiful. It was similar to those decorative bracelets. Then, he calmly tied the other end of the chain around his wrist. The chain seemed to be made of water. It automatically attached to his wrist, but he didn't feel any restraint or weight. When Jin Qian curled his lips in satisfaction. She thought that she would encounter Wei Wei Bai, who had a more hardcore taste. She watched him being imprisoned in such a boring way. He couldn't help but say to the system, no one has ever made chains look so fresh and refined. The system said, maybe it's because he's been a hermit for 700 years, so he's especially ignorant. Wei Wei Bai silently agreed. No matter what, it was better to be a little fresh and mentally weak than to be warm and tasty. When Jin Qian looked at the beautiful silver chain on her slender wrist. She couldn't run away now. Wei Wei Bai was at a loss for words. She looked at him strangely for a while. Only then did he swallow all the flirtatious words. Then, Wei Wei Bai reached out and gently hooked Wen Jinqian's pinky finger. The little fox's light-colored eyes sparkled with a hint of longing. Wen Jinqian's eyes darkened. He said softly, "Do you still want to go out?" The little fox hurriedly shook its head. Wen Jinqian's gaze softened. The stubbornness and anger in his red eyes disappeared. But in the next moment, his gentle gaze was replaced by a sharp coldness. He was like a wild beast whose territory had been invaded. His violent anger made him look above the lotus pond. There was a rumbling sound. It was thunder. The second tribulation of the immortal tribulation had arrived. The thunder rumbled and arrived at the top of Heaven's Gate sect. Dark clouds gathered. Above the tightly shut door of the main hall, there began to be violent spirit energy fluctuations. When Jinqian's obsession caused his emotions to fluctuate greatly. The lightning tribulation locked onto him again. // Chapter 24:10. Although when Jin Qian had lost his mind, his battle instincts were still there. He knew it was dangerous. This kind of danger made the eyes under his eyelashes look even redder, beautiful and cold. Just when Wei Wei Bai thought he was going to do something, he slowly lowered his head and looked at her. This lightning strike looks very scary. Wei Wei Bai quickly nodded. She was about to say, but you're so awesome, you must have a way. In the end, he lowered his eyes in embarrassment, and there was a trace of pity in his beautiful eyes. I'm scared. Wei Wei Bai, boom, 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 boom. Wei Wei Bai looked up with some difficulty. She saw that the spirit energy above the main hall was surging and shaking violently. The lightning strike seemed to be about to fall at any moment. It would blast the two of them into the sky and blast them into pieces. Suddenly, she felt her sleeve tighten and looked down strangely. She saw when Jin Qian reach out and grab her sleeve, his eyes blank. I just remembered how to deal with this danger. Wei Wei Bai's eyes lit up. Really? When Jin Qian smiled. But I forgot again. Wei Wei Bai, he pursed his thin red lips and his voice softened again. So, if you hug me, I might remember. Wei Wei Bai felt that she had been tricked. But when the roof of the main hall was broken through by the huge pillar of lightning, the enchantment shattered. The moment the violent and terrifying power of the lightning strike rushed over, Wei Wei Bai's face turned pale. Almost instinctively, she reached out and hugged Wen Jinqian tightly. Her whole body was about to shrink into his arms. She didn't see that Wen Jinqian's eyes, which were pretending to be blank and innocent, had regained their coldness and gentleness. Even the redness in his eyes had faded a little. She was so scared, but she still didn't escape. She would rather live and die with him. When Jin Qian reached out and pressed her back, hiding her in his arms. How nice. He sighed contentedly. While he was smiling, a huge lightning strike swept over and covered him. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 80. It was a grand hall that was used as a refuge for the later generations of cultivators. He actually couldn't withstand the lightning strike of the immortal tribulation. All kinds of spiritual chi vortexes turned into a terrible spiritual chi storm that swept through the entire heaven sect. The sect protection formation was forced to activate, saving everyone's lives. However, the various senior brothers who had rushed over looked at the shattered main hall with cold hearts. They all knew that their master had entered the demonic path. The second lightning strike destroyed the demonic chi. Everyone had 7 emotions and 6 desires. How could it be so easy to be reborn from the mundane world? Demonic thoughts were the distracting thoughts that persisted in one's heart after one's mortal bonds. He had survived this calamity. When Jin Qian, on the other hand, happened to be in a demonic state, the possibility of successfully passing the lightning tribulation was close to zero. Xian Yi took the lead and entered the hall. However, he saw that there were lotuses everywhere in the hall. The fragrance of the flowers permeated the air. Amidst the flowers, amidst the white immortal fog, a tall and slender figure sat there, his ink-black hair falling behind him, lotus flowers supporting the ends of his hair. The vast and boundless spiritual chi fluctuated in the hall. This was a scene that could only be seen after passing the second lightning tribulation. Su San, who was following behind Xian Yi, suddenly breathed a sigh of relief. Master must have returned to normal. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to pass the second tribulation. Everyone bowed their heads respectfully and was about to call him master. However, they saw when Jin Qian slowly turn his head. His neat robes were a lot messy, and there were a few wounds on his white neck caused by the lightning strike. The blood slowly flowed under his exquisite collarbone, forming an exquisite and horrifying trace on his white skin. However, what everyone sucked in a breath of cold air was not the wound. Instead, when Jinqian's eyes were still red. They were so red that they were clear and cold. His eyelashes lifted slightly, and his eyes were cold. Get out. As soon as he finished speaking, a terrifying spiritual chi appeared and blew everyone out. The door of the main hall was under the strong spiritual chi. It was quickly repaired. In a short while, the main hall that was in ruins just now. It was actually restored to its original state. Relying on the heaven-defying power, everything was restored through the complex array. In the empty main hall, only he and the little fox were left. When Jinqian smiled, then lowered his head and looked at the little fox in his arms. He reached out and touched her ear. When the lightning struck just now, he clearly heard the warning of the heavenly Tao. If he did not regret becoming a demon, then he was destined to be unable to become an immortal. 700 years of cultivation was far too long and lonely. He had never felt lonely before. That was because he had never met anyone who made him lonely. If he had to be lonely to become an immortal, then this immortal was fine. Quick to read the full article at https://www.sashu.com. Quick to read on your phone, https://sashu.com. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on quick, comma. Chapter 24:11. Suddenly, the ear in his fingers moved. When Jinqian lowered his eyes and slowly revealed a smile. You're awake. Bai Weiwei's head was dizzy and she was almost deaf from the lightning. She opened her eyes with difficulty and found herself in Wen Jinqian's arms. His fingers slowly touched the hair on her head and ears. She curled up into a ball on the small fox paw. It was still tied with chains. These chains would change shape with her transformation. It was simply a divine artifact. She immediately looked up and saw that Wen Jinqian's eyes were still red. She immediately heaved a sigh of relief. Just now, she thought that the demonized Wen Jinqian would be struck to death by lightning. Last time, the system also said that this guy carried her through the lightning tribulation. This time, it was the same. There were still so many lightning tribulations to pass. If Wen Jinqian carried her every time, which time would he not be struck by lightning? Wouldn't he die in the same year, month, and day as him? This old monster Wen was actually still vicious. He clearly had so many space transfer methods, but he didn't know how to move her away. He insisted on hugging her to death. Weiwei Bai disdained in her heart and revealed a worried expression. Master, are you okay? She placed two small paws on his chest. She looked up and saw that the youth's clothes were messy. There were burn marks on his white collar from the lightning strike. There were a few wounds on his neck, and his flesh was badly mutilated. Blood dripped from the wounds that had been split open by the lightning strike. The edges of the wounds were charred. It looked unusually painful. However, Wen Jinqian seemed to feel nothing. Instead, he smiled gently. I'm fine. The little fox was only at the foundation establishment stage. When she was undergoing the lightning tribulation just now, the remnants of the lightning strike almost hurt her. He directly blocked it with his body, causing these wounds. Weiwei Bai looked at the wounds on his neck hesitantly. Her beautiful eyes immediately filled with pitiful tears. Following her pitiful gaze, he saw his wounds. Actually, it didn't hurt much. His tolerance was very strong. This wound was not worth mentioning. However, he saw that the little fox's light-colored eyes were filled with sadness for his wounds. When Jinqian did not say anything, He just silently lowered his eyes and pursed his lips. His fingertips began to tremble, as if he was enduring some kind of intense pain. Wei Bai, she would just put on an act. How dare old monster Wen say he's better at acting than me? Since he was able to become an immortal, his physique must be especially amazing. Such a small wound should have healed by itself long ago. He was going to play her out and leave her with no way out. Wei Bai's beautiful foxy eyes narrowed. Suddenly, with a bang, she turned into a young girl. His fluffy fox tail and furry ears were still there. Because she was in his arms. Therefore, she sat directly on his lap after transforming. When Jin Qian didn't move but looked at her calmly. Her messy clothes had already been taken off, revealing her snow-white chest. The meandering bloodstains were shockingly gorgeous on the white skin. His eyes were clear and bright, making the red color even more gorgeous. Wei Bai raised her head and coincidentally rubbed against his delicate chin. She heard him gasp softly. The little fox seemed a little confused. Master, you're in a lot of pain, right? The deep red in Wen Jinqian's eyes deepened. It doesn't hurt. He paused slightly and said, it's just a little pain. His tone unconsciously had a kind of cautiousness that made one's heart soften. Wei Bai stared at his wound in a daze. Suddenly, she reached out her finger and was about to insert it into her abdomen. When Jinqian's originally gentle expression suddenly turned cold. Chapter 24:12. He reached out and grabbed her wrist, his tone turning cold. What are you doing? Wei Bai's eyes were clear and her tone was serious. I want to treat Master's injuries. When Jin Qian took a deep breath. He knew what she was doing from where she was touching. You want to use the fox's inner core to treat my injuries. Wei Bai's ears drooped. She glanced at his neck and said sadly, Master's injuries were caused by heavenly lightning. Normal medicine can't heal them. So she used her own inner core. For demons. The inner core was the source of one's life. If it was damaged, one's cultivation would be damaged. If it was damaged, one's soul would be destroyed. This was a fully formed demon, the most irreplaceable thing. Without it, one wouldn't even have the chance to cultivate. When Jin Qian was in a daze, he finally revealed a smile, as if he was relieved and happy. He was still in a state of bedevilment. But he had already left the initial stage of blanking out. His mind could clearly remember the past. Even the matter between her and Su San. Jealousy immediately arose in his heart. This feeling was so foreign to him that he was at a loss. Jealousy was more bizarre and painful than any of the dangerous battles he had experienced. In his current state, he wouldn't tolerate this. But when he saw the little fox's teary eyes and wanted to take out her own transparent fox inner core to treat his injuries. His dark and twisted heart. But it was wrapped up by her feelings. The cold darkness, the thorns in his heart, fell off a few. The redness in Wen Jinqian's eyes faded a little, but it was still beautiful and evil. He said in a low voice, No, it doesn't hurt anymore. You're not allowed to touch your own inner core in the future. This was the little fox's origin. If it was gone, she wouldn't even be alive. Thinking of this, Wen Jinqian also felt his chest tighten. Wei Bai's shallow eyes clearly reflected his face. She reached out and grabbed his sleeve. Suddenly, she looked up and gently licked his wound. When Jinqian's body stiffened and his pupils shrank. The little fox tilted its head and said innocently, Our fox saliva can heal wounds, although it can only heal very small wounds. With that, she put her hands on his shoulders. Then, she gently licked his bleeding wound. If it wasn't treated, the wound from the lightning strike would remain like this forever. It would not heal itself. After all, it contained the power of the heavenly Tao. When Jinqian didn't say anything, nor did he stop her. Instead, he lowered his eyes slightly, and there was a hint of suppressed confusion in his eyes. The young girl hugged his neck obediently, and her silver curly hair fell on Wen Jinqian's body. His hand slowly landed on her back. His beautiful fingertips gently grabbed her hair. It didn't hurt, but it was a restraining position. The wound slowly healed. The little fox's eyes suddenly widened. She looked up and revealed a pleasantly surprised smile. "Master, look, the wound is beginning to heal." When Jinqian stared into her pure eyes, his breathing deepened, and his voice trembled slightly. "Really? Maybe your saliva does have healing properties." Wei Wei Bai happily stuck to him and said with a smile, "It's good that it works." After saying that, she hugged him tightly again. She stuck to his neck and gradually moved down. Her silver fluffy hair was messy on the youth's body. The fragrance of the lotus became stronger. When Jinqian's eyes were dark and deep, the fingers that grabbed her hair also slowly moved up and finally passed through her hair. He couldn't help but press on the back of her neck. Chapter 24:13. He lowered his head, his eyes dark and his tone soft. "Be good, there is a better way to heal Master, Master will teach you." He thought that he was really bad. After he turned into a demon, he did not have a trace of noble and cold thoughts. He only had the impulse to lure the fox into hell. The little fox rubbed against his collar, her thick eyelashes blinking as she looked up at him in confusion. The youth's gentle and strange eyes quietly stared at her. His white and pure face had a few traces of a demonic blush, the fourth petal of the lotus between his eyebrows had turned completely red. The youth's gentle fingertips gently stroked the corner of her eyes. Finally, his palm covered her clear eyes that did not know anything about the world. "Are you willing to save me?" The youth's hoarse voice was evil. The little fox pricked up her ears because she could not see anything. Her eyes blinked, but she could not escape from his palm. She was a bit confused, but she did not hesitate. She reached out and grabbed his sleeve. "Of course I am willing to save Master." When Jinqian's thin lips curved slightly, his whole body was already on top of her. He was full of a strange fragrance. It was like the most tempting smell in the world. He was luring ignorant people into his trap. The lotus suddenly bloomed. So the half-closed flowers bloomed all of a sudden. The hall was filled with a pink halo, the youth's black hair and silver curly hair tangled in the lotus. "Do you like it?" His voice was close to her small ear. The little fox narrowed her eyes, looking at him in confusion, but there was no trace of disgust. It was like a piece of white paper, but also like the purest gem. All that was reflected was his aura. Her beautiful and enchanting eyes rippled with light. "I like it," she whispered, but was incomparably gentle. When Jinqian could not help but smile, but the color in his eyes deepened. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 85. The main door of the hall. It was always closed. The little fox and the bewitched Wen Jinqian never came out. Su San walked around every day, worried that he would see the little fox's corpse one day. When he did not see anything strange, he left again. Xian Yi often brought his junior brothers to patrol a few rounds. They were worried that the demonized master would suddenly explode and open the door to kill them all. But there was none. Everyone was worried and bewildered. Although cultivation was long, 10 days to half a month was nothing. But the bomb that was Wen Jinqian's obsession was still there. No one dared to lower their guard. If there was no movement, everyone would just wait. Just treat it as Master going into seclusion again, but this time, little junior sister was brought along as well. No one thought wrongly. After all, when Jin Qian was a person of character, it was hard for people to think otherwise. However, after waiting for more than a month, there was still no movement. Little junior sister's natal lantern was also fine. Everyone was finally relieved. However, the Heavenly Gate sect suddenly welcomed an unexpected guest. High Lord Blue Phoenix wasn't the only one who came to visit. Instead, he brought the venerables of the other 9 sects to visit. These people were all here to act as matchmakers for High Lord Blue Phoenix. High Lord Blue Phoenix was also a legendary figure in the cultivation world. She was the most powerful genius before when Jin Qian was born. Before when Jin Qian, she was the cultivator who broke all kinds of records. Even after when Jin Qian came. Although her records were broken, there was one thing that was not broken. She was the most beautiful cultivator in the cultivation world. Her beauty was very sensational even in the cultivation world where there were few desires. At https://www.sashu.com/quick to read the full article at https://www.sashu.com download at https://www.sashu.com quick to read on. Quick, comma. Chapter 24:14. Everyone knew that when Jin Qian was transcending the immortal tribulation. And not long ago, he had survived the second lightning strike. Everyone knew how important source experience was. If it weren't for the fact that he was transcending the tribulation in the Heavenly Gate sect last time, countless people would have crowded over to watch. After all, no one except when Jin Qian could break the array formation of the Heavenly Gate sect. Regardless of whether when Jin Qian had soar or not, everyone was jealous of this experience. However, when Jin Qian was famous for not going out, not caring about anything, and not making friends, no one could ask even if they wanted to. Coincidentally, Supremacy Blue Phoenix suddenly had an epiphany at a critical moment in her cultivation. She actually had an obsession with Wen Jinqian. She wanted to marry him. She condescended to invite the sect leaders of the various sects, hoping that they could come to the Heavenly Gate sect to be her matchmaker. Even if it didn't work out, it could be considered a way to resolve her obsession. Everyone knew that when Jin Qian cultivated a Dao technique, it wasn't suitable for emotional entanglement. Therefore, matchmaking was very likely to be unsuccessful. Regardless of whether it was successful or not, there was a reason for the Heavenly Gate sect to see Wen Jinqian. Therefore, when a group of big shots from the cultivation world came knocking on the door, even Xian Yi frowned. He wasn't qualified to receive a gathering of this level. Therefore, Xian Yi could only take out a small bead. This was the only way to contact Wen Jinqian. If something major hadn't happened, he wouldn't have used this thing. He knew that he should contact his master, but he was hesitant. If his master hadn't recovered from his demonization, what should he do? Most of the guests who came were up to no good. A cultivator who had been demonized and was about to transcend the immortal tribulation. Everyone knew how terrifying the instability factor was. If others found out that his master had been demonized, these people might have the idea of eliminating his master. Over the years, the Heavenly Gate sect had so many resources that everyone was envious. With a reason, a group of people could have the idea of destroying the Heavenly Gate sect. However, it wasn't appropriate to block them out, especially using matchmaking as a reason. If he blocked them like this, it would be a big deal to be suspected. Xian Yi hesitated again and again but still crushed the bead. The bead turned into a white mist. Within the fog, an extremely hazy image appeared. Among the beautiful lotuses, the lotuses had all turned fiery red. In the red light, the water in the pool was sparkling. The sound of splashing water could be heard. A slender and fair hand rested on the edge of the pool. His black hair was wet and draped over his shoulders. On his fair back, the beautiful and powerful lines of his collarbone were faintly discernible among the flowers. He seemed to sense something. In the hazy fog, the young man gently tilted his head. There was no trace of red in her beautiful eyes. They had returned to their usual cold and holy black color. What is it? Xianyi glanced at him and bowed deeply. He told Wen Jinqian what had happened. Within the white fog, the youth calmly said, "Let them in." Xianyi said, "Yes, master." Just as he finished speaking, the white mist dissipated and the crushed bead returned to its original state. The color in his master's eyes had returned to normal. It seemed that he had overcome his obsession with becoming a demon. Xianyi heaved a sigh of relief, but he still felt something was wrong. He felt that his master's temperament was a little strange. But the youth in the lotus pool lowered her head. Under her thick and dark eyelashes, a sharp red glow appeared in the depths of her dark eyes. Suddenly, the girl in his arms moved. Oh. Her head of silver hair was scattered in the water, and her slightly round eyes were half closed, hiding her alluring charm. This month, she had finally completely transformed from a fox cub to a mature fox. A fox's seductiveness was like a red poppy flower. Poisonous and depraved, but so beautiful that it was irresistible. When Jinqian knew that she had not woken up. Sure enough, she only moved her eyelashes. Then she closed her eyes and fell asleep. The lotus was deep. He gently kissed her hair. It just so happens that there are so many people here. All of them can be considered to be of high status. Let them be the witnesses. His wedding with the little fox. The //T there. Chapter 24:15. Wei Wei Bai felt an itch in her ears. When she woke up, she found herself lying in a lotus field. Huge lotus petals covered her body. She touched her kidneys and couldn't help but say to the system, "My kidneys are weak." System, you still have one, so cherish it. Damn it, he looked at the bullet screen for more than a month. He was just short of being a Buddhist. Even hand jobs and snacks couldn't save his boring life. Wei Wei Bai reached out to cover her face, when Jinqian's state after he turned into a demon is too scary. The system was silent for a while, then sighed, "More than 700 years old, please understand." Wei Wei Bai, system, you didn't lose out either, the favorability is 88. Look, so many coin numbers. Selling one's kidneys was the best way to increase favorability. Wei Wei Bai, I feel like I lost out. I thought when Jinqian was so pure, how would I know, system? Don't say any more, the bullet screen will come again. Wei Wei Bai, the system saw that the stupid host still looked like she was losing out. It couldn't help but comfort her. Isn't the favorability very easy to increase this time? You don't even need to die, you're almost done with the main mission. Wei Wei Bai thought about it, it was true. Ever since when Jinqian turned into a demon in this world, it was when Jinqian who had been chasing her. She didn't even need to move. The favorability increased by itself, there was no sense of accomplishment. Wei Wei Bai sighed, the main mission is almost done, it's a win. The system nodded, just as it said something. But it felt like it forgot something. Wei Wei Bai also had something to say, her much slower brain also felt like she forgot something. What did she forget? Ding, do you miss me? Wei Wei Bai and the system, oh, I remember now. Seeing you miss me so much, I'm embarrassed to not appear. Wei Wei Bai and the system, don't appear, I beg you, why don't you die? Side mission, little bitch, the side mission has been activated due to the unforgettable love of the host. Detected that the male protagonist of this dimension is too deeply possessed and is in a state where he can destroy the world at any time. Wei Wei Bai, don't tell me she has to save the world again. Just let the world be destroyed. Wei Wei Bai, the male lead is in a stable state of bedevilment. He is conscious and his power is being sealed. Host, please make the male lead completely bewitched. Becoming a demon has a 100% chance of completing the mission. Punishment for failure, become a retard with the system and love each other for a lifetime. Dear, she's a real retard, not the kind that acts cute. After reminding him, he even photoshopped a picture. It flashed across the minds of the host and the system. Wei Wei Bai looks like she's in a daze. She's wearing open crotch pants and has messy hair. She's squatting on a pile of garbage to catch flies. Wei Wei Bai, what the system saw was frowny face. He looks like a fool, holding a broken bowl and begging from door to door. Kind system, give me some life points. My host is going to starve to death, please pity me. One night and one unity trembled. He felt like the malice of the universe was pouring from the top of his head to the soles of his feet. His whole body was cold, and he shivered. Side missions were such a vicious tumor. As the difficulty of the side missions increased, their methods of tormenting people went up another level. This punishment was even more unbearable than death. Wei Wei Bai hugged herself silently. She couldn't bear to eat flies. Wearing open crotch pants. That didn't matter. Where's your integrity? The system hugged itself as well, thinking that it used to be a tycoon. Transmigration system, Adonis, come here. Transmigration system, Adonis, come here. / transmigration system, Adonis, come here. Transmigration system, Adonis, come here. / next time you open the bookshelf, you'll see it. If you like transmigration system, Adonis, come here. Chapter 24:16. After going crazy, he actually became a beggar. He was poor now, and no one knew. If everyone knew that he had become poor in the future, what would happen to his self-esteem? What would happen to it? The system and the host looked up silently. The bar of Wen Jinqian's demonized state. Demonized state, 60%. Wei Wei Bai stared at the bar. Wen Jinqian looks so calm, but he's already at 60% demonized. The system said, when you can't get what you want, you'll be demonized. But the male lead seems to have gotten what he wanted. Wei Wei Bai said, he's still in demonized state. The system said, according to the information, the Tao technique he cultivates can't be emotional. If you make him fall in love, it can only reduce his obsession, but it can't make him return to normal. Wen Jinqian was so rational now. He could basically return to how he was before demonized. It was also because his obsession was satisfied. But his heartless Tao technique, as long as he was in love, he would have distracting thoughts. These distracting thoughts would keep him in demonized state. He would never be able to become an immortal. Of course, if Wei Wei Bai continued to be in love with Wen Jinqian like this, Wen Jinqian's demonized state would always be at 60%. And there would be no change. Because this 60% was the heartless Tao technique's punishment for Wen Jinqian. Of course, as long as he didn't seek death and his emotions didn't fluctuate violently. Even if Wen Jinqian was demonized, he would look no different from usual. Wei Wei Bai's mind was already clear. She sat up and found that she was wearing a dress. It was a new lotus dress. Her body was taller, slimmer, but the places that should be full were all perfect. Her silver hair was still fluffy and curly. She looked up slightly, the corners of her eyes were long and seductive. There was an extra lotus petal between her eyebrows. The lotus petal was red and gorgeous, so beautiful that it was suffocating. She lazily brushed her hair behind her ears, revealing her beautiful and fair ears. When Jin Qian had 5 lotus petals on his forehead. Now that he's given one to me, what's the use of it? The system flipped through the information and said after looking at it carefully, this is his natal lotus, which is also the condensation of his power. He gave you these petals to give you power. Without any hesitation, Wei Wei Bai raised her hand and gathered a ball of spirit qi. This was something that she, a foundation establishment cultivator, was completely unable to do. From the foundation establishment stage, she had directly skipped the golden core stage in her cultivation. When Jin Qian had given him too much power, her body simply couldn't take it. Therefore, a lot of power was still hidden in the lotus petal on his forehead. And the power that overflowed directly sent her to the golden core stage. If when Jin Qian was said to be a true cultivation genius, she reckoned that she was the fastest person in history to reach the golden core stage by taking drugs. It was embarrassing to talk about it. After all, in the immortal cultivation world, people looked down on taking drugs the most. They were both in the golden core stage. Those who had cultivated through their own means were like those who had taken pills or used transcendent artifacts to force their way to the Aurus core stage. The respect he received was incomparable. And the lightning tribulation of the golden core stage. When Jin Qian helped her solve it again. Her plane was simply gnawing on when Jin Qian from beginning to end. Wait until her golden core stage stabilized a little. The power of the lotus petals could continue to send her to the nascent soul stage. Let's not talk about it. If anyone heard it, they would be beaten to death by those cultivators who had cultivated in fear for hundreds of years and had finally reached the golden core stage. She stood up from the lotus flower. Those small lotus flowers immediately came over and touched her affectionately. Wei Wei Bai casually pushed them away and stepped out step by step. Chapter 24:17. Her silver hair fell below her calves. It swayed gently with her enchanting steps. Bai Weiwei's ankles were tied with a silver chain, made of chains. After when Jin Qian went out, the chains in their hands were tied to each other. It became an ankle chain around her ankles. As soon as she took half a step out of the gate of the Heavenly Gate sect, the chain would stop her. This chain was a low-grade immortal level treasure. The most important feature was how strong the owner was. Then the person who was tied must have the same strength to untie it. When Jin Qian's strength was now in front of Soar, the first person in the immortal continent. She was a good-for-nothing golden core cultivator who took Wen Jinqian's strength. If Wen Jinqian was not willing, she would not be able to untie this chain for the rest of her life. No, she still had the system to take advantage of. Wei Wei Bai was about to walk out of the gate of the main hall when a few cranes immediately ran over. They bowed to her affectionately and respectfully on the ground. Wei Wei Bai said, "Go away." The cranes looked at her pitifully and then lay on the ground again. The place where they lay was the gate. It was clear that they did not want Wei Wei Bai to go out. Such a big bird was not cute at all. Why was it acting cute? The system said, if you want to make the male lead go crazy, you have to start provoking his emotional instability. Are you trying to run away and make his heart ache? Wei Wei Bai shook her head. It's useless for me to run anywhere unless I give up this plane. The immortal cultivation world was a high-level plane. When Jin Qian planted lotus petals on her body. Plus, she was still wearing a chain. Her body was full of his scent. With Wen Jinqian's ability, she could drill into the earth's core. Wen Jinqian could easily flip the earth and pull her out. So running away now was useless. Wei Wei Bai calmed down, her eyes cold and flirtatious. She said to the system, "Now we should focus on gaining favorability. If we want to make a man go crazy, we have to make his favorability high enough." The uncute Wei Wei Bai. He was finally not stupid anymore. The system looked at its normal host with satisfaction. Wei Wei Bai stepped on the wings of the red-crowned crane and walked out. As long as she didn't leave the Heavenly Gate sect, she was actually not restricted from going anywhere. But the red-crowned cranes were afraid. They were especially afraid that Wei Wei Bai would get lost. When Jin Qian skinned all of them and stewed them. Therefore, the immortal cranes squeezed into a group and carefully took small steps with their long legs. Just like that, he followed behind by Wei Wei, who swaggered out. A young girl with silver curly hair in a pink dress walked with seductive steps. The cool and beautiful lotus pattern on her forehead had a hint of holiness to it. She asked the system, "Where is Wen Jinqian?" The system replied, "The blind date is in the reception hall." When guests came, the official reception would be in the front hall of the Heavenly Gate sect. Wei Wei Bai smiled. "I didn't expect that someone would take a fancy to the old turtle." The system said, "There are many who have their eyes on him, but no one dares to pursue him. The one who came this time is known as the #1 beauty in the cultivation world." Wei Wei Bai paused in her steps. #1 beauty, the system was speechless. It forgot about its host's problem. It thought that she had matured and was no longer thinking about the #1 beauty. In the end, Wei Wei Bai asked, "Is she prettier or am I prettier?" The system said, "Both of you have your own merits." After all, the one who came for the blind date seemed to have a temperament of the Wen Jinqian type. He was cold and aloof, as if he didn't eat the food of mortals. Wei Wei Bai, on the other hand, seemed to have a temperament that was a little, gorgeous. The. Chapter 24:18. He could only look at temperament. After all, appearance, in his eyes, was all about 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a while, then said slowly, "Before I matured, my brain was a little cute." "Stupid is stupid, why did you say it was cute?" The system was about to refute, then it finally realized something and held its head silently, not daring to say anything. Wei Wei Bai sighed, "I've realized it now. Is the reward given by the main system to cheat me? Do I have to pay the price of my IQ to act cute?" His tone was slow and full of suspicion. It made the system feel a chill down its spine. Wei Wei Bai said, "You didn't remind me. Are you being seduced by the main system?" The system immediately explained, "I didn't remind you because I saw that you were fine. I can't live under the same sky with the main system. I won't hug anyone's thigh." Wei Wei Bai said, "But my heart is hurt." The system said, "Recently, there's a very good beauty artifact in the supermarket. Sprinkle it in the air and everyone's beauty will decrease by 3 points. Only you will be the center of attention. Although it couldn't increase the host's beauty. But wouldn't you be more beautiful if others' beauty decreased?" Wei Wei Bai said, "Why can't you just make me the most beautiful woman in the world?" The system was speechless. "Wake up, host. There are so many worlds already. You're a mature host." Why was he still thinking about the lowly title of the world's #1 beauty in middle school? Although it couldn't be the most beautiful woman. But it was also a good thing to be able to decrease the beauty of others. The system said that it had 50 life points. It thought that it could scare off the host. In the end, Wei Wei Bai said, "Buy it. When it comes to beauty, it's a big deal. Big deal my ass. How many times did I want to die? I couldn't bear to give up the dozens of favorability points." Why did the host's brain automatically decrease when it came to beauty? The system looked at the beauty artifact in its hand and fell into deep silence. The host was really a species that couldn't be understood. Wen Jinqian's expression was indifferent. In the past, his eyes were more gentle. Now, she was even more aloof and holy. The lotus flower on his forehead was originally 5 petals, but now there were only 4 petals left. Furthermore, the originally colorless petals were exceptionally gorgeous red. It added a strange charm to the pure and holy him. Xian Yi glanced at his master's forehead and finally understood why he had such a strange feeling. Master's natal lotus was missing a petal. It even changed color. A few of the disciples who were closer to him more or less knew about it. The color of his master's lotus represented the depth of his emotions. The colorless lotus represented that master had no attachment to this world. And the color was so thick and beautiful to such an extent, it was simply a demon that had fallen into the human world. However, the only people who knew the reason for the lotus to change color were the few of them. As for the rest of the outsiders, they would at most find it strange. This time, the guests were the venerable masters of the other 9 sections. Only one person was special. High Lord Blue Phoenix sat on a cushion. When she entered the gate just now, she immediately rode a horse and pulled a carriage, causing flowers to flutter all the way. When she came down from the carriage, she was wearing a veil and a white dress. She looked like a fairy. Every step she took was so elegant that it was as if she was walking on air. When she saw Wen Jinqian, she bent her knees and gently landed on the cushion. There was a hint of a reserved smile in her cold eyes. We parted 100 years ago. Now that we meet again, Wenjun is even more elegant. // Chapter 24:19. Lord Wenjun was Wen Jinqian's nickname outside. Qing Feng had always been proud, but now, she was trying to curry favor with Wen Jinqian. Most of the other big shots also had warm smiles on their faces. After all, to be able to see Wen Jinqian come out to receive them. It meant that the matchmaking this time was likely to succeed. Of course, more importantly, if Wen Jinqian was happy. It would be even better to pass down the experience of source tribulation during this meeting. Wen Jinqian's eyes were cold, and the red color of the lotus seemed to be stained on his eyelashes. It caused his black eyes to have a few more traces of seductive light. He didn't seem to see Lord Qing Feng. Instead, his eyelashes trembled and he looked outside. His fingertips moved as if he felt something. The little fox ran out of the hall. He lowered his eyes and pursed his lips unhappily. It seemed that she wasn't tired enough. The atmosphere was a little awkward. Lord Qing Feng's words. Wen Jinqian actually ignored her. Could it be that the matter was not going to work? The smile under Lord Qing Feng's veil stiffened a little. She casually lifted the veil with her fingers. The veil suddenly fell to the ground. Her eyes were delicate, and her white face was beautiful and cold, like the white snow of the mountains. Only when she looked at Wen Jinqian's eyes were there a few more traces of affection, and also a few more traces of beauty, which added to the brilliance of her appearance. After all, the number 1 beauty was not a rumor. Once the veil was removed, the gazes of the others couldn't help but be attracted by her. They even felt that Wen Jinqian was a good match for her. Lord Qing Feng had been reserved and cold for thousands of years. She was a few hundred years older than Wen Jinqian, but because of the cultivation realm, she had reached the Mahayana stage. She maintained her appearance close to that of a young girl. It was just that she was too old. No matter how good her appearance was, there was a trace of maturity between her eyebrows. For example, Wen Jinqian was too strong and had always been in the form of a young man. However, that divine aura did not give off the feeling of a young man. This was very natural in the cultivation world. Many old monsters, no matter how young they looked, unless they deliberately disguised their temperament. Otherwise, when they sat upright, their aura and temperament were worlds apart from that of a real young man. However, they were indeed good-looking. When Jin Qian and High Lord Blue Phoenix were in the same place, it was like a beautiful and cold painting. She was elegant and refined, and her talent surpassed that of immortals. Even the people from the Heavenly Gate sect felt the same way for a while. Exalted Lord Blue Phoenix and his master were like ice mountains accompanied by cold snow. They were indescribably harmonious. Two beautiful ice cubes were placed together. It was cold, but it was quite pleasing to the eye. High Lord Blue Phoenix spoke again. 10 years ago, I wanted to cross the early Grand Ascension realm and advance to the middle Grand Ascension realm, but I encountered an obsession and heart demon. Even after going into seclusion for 10 years, I still couldn't remove this obsession. No one said anything. Instead, he looked at Wen Jinqian. Everyone knew that the obsession she was talking about was him. In the spacious and solemn hall, the aroma of immortal tea filled the air. Wen Jinqian was expressionless. Even his eyes were blank. He turned a deaf ear to High Lord Blue Phoenix's words. The cold and noble young man held a teacup in his hand. He stared blankly at the teacup. A scene that only he could see appeared in the clear green tea. Her slender and beautiful ankles were tied with an exquisite silver chain. Her feet, which were wearing soft flat embroidered shoes, stepped on the white jade ground and walked happily. That was the little fox's feet. His gaze moved up, and the scene moved up randomly. The pink lotus-like skirt swayed softly with her footsteps. It was like a lotus flower that had become a spirit. It was not a spirit. It was just a fox that had become a spirit. // To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the collect below to record this reading record. Quick, comma. Chapter 24:20. When Jin Qian couldn't help but smile. It was rare for her to go out. She was so happy that it affected his mood. His displeasure towards her running out also dissipated a little. Anyway, she couldn't walk out of the gate of the Heavenly Gate sect. Even if she did walk out, there was also a door protection array blocking her. He was the one who refined the door protection array. No one could enter without his permission. It was easier to go out. Usually, as long as one had the ability to fly on a sword, they could enter and leave at will. But now, when Jin Qian thought of how he had modified one ring of the array last night, it was branded with the little fox's life aura. To others, the array was still the same array. But to the little fox, the effect of the array was the opposite. She could easily enter from the outside. But she couldn't go out. Layer by layer of imprisonment, depriving her of freedom bit by bit. It was all done by the bewitched Wen Jinqian out of his heart. He was still rational in his bewitched state. He even understood how despicable and shameless he was. But he still did it calmly. Perhaps the demons in the demon world weren't as hypocritical and evil as him. When Jin Qian looked at the teacup for a long time before taking a sip of tea, the scene in the tea turned into broken lines. It was sucked into his thin lips, as if he wanted to devour the fox in the picture. Blue Phoenix saw that when Jin Qian didn't say anything. However, when she saw his expression soften a little, she thought that he had listened to her. After all, everyone knew Wen Jinqian's cultivation path. It required him to be heartless. But who said that plants had no heart? It was just because there wasn't a good enough woman to move him. High Lord Blue Phoenix's cold eyes became soft and affectionate. If there was anyone in this immortal cultivation continent who was worthy of her, only Wen Jinqian. The only person in the immortal cultivation world who had cultivated to the point of flying was Wen Jinqian. And the next stage of Soar was her Mahayana realm. The Mahayana realm was divided into the early, middle, and end stages. Although she was only at the early stage, she had the ability to do so at her age. There was no such thing in the immortal cultivation world. The other 5 old monsters in the Mahayana realm. They had all cultivated for thousands of years and were in a state of hermits. She and Wen Jinqian were the real cultivation world. He was the genius who cultivated the fastest and kept breaking records. She really couldn't find another woman who was as compatible with Wen Jinqian as she was. A glance from 100 years ago. She had taken a liking to Wen Jinqian. At that time, the youth's eyes were clear and cold, and the lotus flower between his brows was light and gentle. In the face of the provocative demons, he merely raised his eyes slightly. He didn't even move his fingers, but he was able to utilize the boundless spiritual energy. Annihilate all the demons. However, he stood calmly on the high ground with his hands behind his back. His eyes were calm and emotionless. It was as if the entire world had suddenly shattered. He couldn't move him in the slightest. That scene lasted until today. It was still her obsession and inner demon. With her current realm, it was extremely dangerous for her to jump realms every time. If she could marry Wen Jinqian, not only would her obsession be resolved. She even received Wen Jinqian's guidance and spirit qi. Everyone knew the scariest thing about Wen Jinqian. It was his boundless spiritual energy, as boundless as the heavens and earth. However, even with so many reasons, it was still not enough. Lord Blue Phoenix looked at Wen Jinqian with a hint of infatuation in her eyes. The youth's fair fingers held the teacup casually. His eyes were cold and distant, and the lotus flower between his brows was bright red and beautiful. /Quick download Transmigration system, Adonis, come here and read this on your phone, https://m, Sashu. Calm, quick, calma. Chapter 24-21. It was as if everything in the world could not enter his eyes. As if bewitched, she leaned forward slightly. Wenjun's tribulation is thrilling. I have a heart-cleansing candlestick that can help you clear your heart and be wise. A heart-cleansing candlestick. It was a high-grade immortal level. There were only a dozen or so high-grade immortal level items in the cultivation world. And this candlestick was the dream of all immortal cultivators who were about to transcend the tribulation. Every time there was a lightning tribulation, this candlestick could protect the immortal cultivator's last trace of clarity and would definitely not be attacked by any demonic thoughts. But the candlestick also had its drawbacks. The only problem was that it required too much spiritual energy. When blocking the lightning tribulation, every trace of spiritual energy had to be used. Many people could not use this candlestick at all. For example, Supremacy Blue Phoenix was very cautious when using this. She would rather use other methods to solve her obsession. She would definitely not use a candlestick. But for Wen Jinqian, this candlestick was the most suitable. Everyone knew that Wen Jinqian had never lacked spiritual energy at all. His spiritual energy came directly from heaven and earth. Compared to other immortal cultivators, he had to refine it. He was directly connected to heaven and earth. Unless there was no spiritual energy in the entire cultivation world. Otherwise, Wen Jinqian would definitely not be in the predicament of not having spiritual energy. So there were a dozen or so high-grade immortal level magic treasures. The refreshing candlestick was the most convenient for Wen Jinqian. The others were a little moved. After all, the refreshing candlestick was of such a high grade. He directly took it out and gave it away. He had not seen it in so many years. Even if Wen Jinqian was so pure and simple, he would be tempted. The other big shots smiled but did not say anything. Everyone was optimistic about this marriage. At their level, immortal cultivators were indifferent to everything. Only Soar was an obsession. If when Jinqian failed or succeeded one day, Soar. But he did not leave any experience behind. That would be the biggest waste. If when Jinqian got married, he would leave some valuable experience for his partner. And Supremacy Blue Phoenix was famous for being popular. Even though she was very cold, she had a good heart. If she had gained some experience, she would not be stingy. Under everyone's friendly and expectant gazes, when Jinqian's expression finally changed a little. The young man gently put down the teacup, and his eyes became a little gentler. His thin lips curved slightly, revealing a calm and polite smile. Today, I invited all the supremacies to join my sect out of selfishness. In the past, I've cultivated for more than 700 years. My Tao heart is calm and has no worries. I've never thought about having a dual cultivation partner. But today is different. I do have one more concern in my heart. One said. Everyone was invigorated. Even Venerable Blue Phoenix couldn't believe it. His usually cold eyes were filled with ecstasy as if he had gotten what he wanted. She had been obsessed with this man for 100 years. It was enough to become a demon. On the other hand, when Jinqian's disciples were confused. What? Concern. Dual cultivation partner. Their master Tian was always in seclusion in the lotus pond, so when did he have an extra worry? Wait a minute, Su San's face turned deathly pale. He immediately looked at his eldest senior brother. Xian Yi's expression was calm, but his eyes were trembling. Fuck, don't let them guess correctly. During this period of time, their master had become a demon. They had been worried sick. They couldn't figure out why his obsession was so deep. It wasn't that they didn't think about their little junior sister. But they didn't dare to think about it. Every time they did, it was like blaspheming their master. And although their little junior sister was a fox spirit. Chapter 24-22. 300 years might sound like a long time, but this was not the case. In fact, when they were formed, their age began to be counted. Because when monsters were formed, human intelligence had just been activated. Therefore, in their eyes, little junior sister was similar to a child. Master, it can't be. I didn't expect you to be such a master. Those who were slow had blank looks on their faces. Those who were not slow had ugly expressions on their faces. It was one thing to take a fancy to the little fox. But they were master and disciple in name. This was not only a mess of seniority. It was also against the rules. However, it was possible, probably, that master had taken a fancy to someone else. After all, there were so many cultivation methods. Even if he had been in seclusion. There were many ways to make friends. It was also possible that he had taken a fancy to Supremacy Qing Feng. Otherwise, how could Supremacy Qing Feng have the courage to propose marriage? Just as the atmosphere was oppressive and joyous. A crane's cry suddenly sounded. In the empty hall, a strange fragrance spread out. This smell. Everyone looked at Wen Jinqian. The lotus fragrance on Wen Jinqian's body was famous. However, every time he met people, he would restrain the strange fragrance on his body. It was faintly discernible. Although it could be smelled, it was not strong. But this lotus fragrance that came from outside. It was exceptionally strong and intoxicating. It was as if it instantly made people feel like they were in a lotus pond, pulling them into a beautiful dream. And this smell was exactly the same as Wen Jinqian's aura. The door opened, and the sky fell. A slender figure stepped into the bright light and walked in. When Jinqian was originally sitting, but he suddenly stood up. His white robe fell with his movements. His somewhat lazy half-closed eyes opened at this moment. There was a hint of red in the middle of his deep black eyes. The red flush flashed by, and no one noticed. Everyone's eyes followed Wen Jinqian's movements and couldn't help but look at the door. They saw a few cranes fly in and bow to Wen Jinqian. The youth ignored them and walked straight to the door. He walked towards the figure at the door. The bright light sprinkled down. For some reason, everyone felt that the door was much brighter. In the light, the girl's elegant lotus-colored dress fluttered with her quick and nimble steps. Her silver curly hair was loose and messy as it draped over her back. The ends of her hair hung down to her calves, scattering powder-like light spots. Her indifferent eyes were shallow and clear. The corners of her eyes were slightly long and narrow. She was charming and flirtatious. There was a lotus petal between her eyebrows, red and exceptionally exquisite. He didn't look like an immortal, nor did he look like a mortal. Even though the girl had an arrogant and indifferent appearance, she was still like a silver flame, so gorgeous that it pierced people's eyes. It was too warm and beautiful, and it made everyone else lose their color. When Jinqian walked up to her and gently tucked her messy hair behind her ear. His fingers were gentle but domineering as they trailed along her hair and pinched her delicate neck. He didn't even say anything. He exerted some force in his hand, forcing the girl to raise her head. Under her confused gaze, he lowered his head and kissed her softly. Wei Bai, who had spent 50 HP to enter the game, was speechless. When Jinqian slowly let go of her, the redness in his eyes disappeared and turned black. He ignored the shocked crowd. After he slowly smoothed her hair, he whispered, "The lotus nourishes the body. Why don't you lie down for a while longer?" If she continued to lie down, she would become a vegetable. She had been lying down for more than a month. Wei Bai didn't have time to refute. Instead, she struggled to look at others. Where was the #1 beauty? Old Monster Wen had stolen the limelight. Her 50 HP couldn't be wasted. She had to be in the same frame as the #1 beauty. She had to suppress her. She couldn't let others take away the headlines. Unfortunately, when Jinqian blocked her and didn't let others see. He even calmly turned around and said with a smile, "I've embarrassed myself in front of everyone. 7 days later is my wedding with Xiao Qi. I hope everyone can give me face and be a witness." With so many big shots in the cultivation world as witnesses, the wedding would cause a huge sensation. It was useless even if Wei Bai regretted it in the future. Because the entire cultivation world knew that she was his. // Chapter 24-23. The scene was very quiet. Everyone thought that there was something going on between Supremacy Blue Phoenix and Wen Jinqian. As a result, this slap left everyone dumbfounded. Everyone's eyes were like lightning as they looked at Wei Bai. The beautiful girl was slender but seductive. She was so gorgeous that it made people greedy. Under this beauty that occupied all the colors, all the fresh and cold beauty was shattered. Even when Jinqian by her side couldn't hide her beauty at all. And everyone finally saw the lotus on her forehead clearly. It was actually a petal of Wen Jinqian's natal lotus. This was his natal source. It was something that no one could take out. Wen Jinqian had cultivated for 700 years and only managed to cultivate 5 lotus petals. He had already transcended the tribulation sore. One could imagine how much power was stored in a lotus petal. And the girl's cultivation was only at the golden core stage. Or, because of the influence of the lotus petal, she was only at the golden core stage. Her foundation was extremely weak, and her hands and feet were weak. And And she was transformed from a spirit. Furthermore, it was a young spiritual monster. This was too weak. The lotus petal was full of spiritual energy. No wonder the girl's aura was the strange fragrance of the lotus. Because her body and strength were wrapped in the lotus's spiritual energy. Of course, it was Wen Jinqian's aura. In the past, no one could imagine who Wen Jinqian would be with. Even if they racked their brains, they would think that he might be with Supremacy Blue Phoenix. After all, the two icebergs standing together were beautiful and had no desires. It was impossible for people to think about it wrongly. When Jinqian was abstinent to the point of angering people and gods. Everyone looked at him as if he was a god. They didn't feel that he had a trace of desire in the world. This was also the reason why Wen Jinqian could cultivate so quickly. The process of immortal cultivation was to eliminate desires. And he didn't have a trace of desire at all. Of course, immortal cultivation was faster than anyone else. But at this moment, the youth gently held the girl's face. His eyelashes were slightly lowered, and his eyes were as gentle as water. The corners of his thin and heartless lips were gently raised, and there was an uncontrollable smile. It was only a matter of a smile for a god to be reduced to a human. When Jinqian said softly, "It's windy here. You'd better go back and rest. If you like crowds, I'll invite more people to the wedding." Wei Wei Bai stared at him with wide eyes. When Jinqian knew that she was surprised, but he didn't regret his decision. He saw that her eyes were misty and she seemed to be annoyed. Could it be that she didn't like him being so sudden? When Jinqian's black eyes were filled with malevolence. Or did she regret it? But in the next second, Wei Wei Bai finally found an opportunity and reached out to grab his arm. She coldly asked, "Who is Blue Phoenix High Lord?" When Jinqian paused and said in a low voice, "She's just a guest." "Why are you asking?" "Wei Wei Bai, I heard that she is the #1 beauty." A beauty artifact with 50 HP was called 10 minutes of beauty. It only took 10 minutes. She had to be in the same frame as the #1 beauty. Otherwise, the 50 HP would be wasted. It was a luxury item that she rarely bought. If it didn't work, it would be like saving up a year's worth of pocket money to buy super expensive cosmetics. Just as she opened the lid, the cosmetics would be smashed by the naughty child. That heartache would be suffocating. They had to be in the same frame and not waste their HP. Wei Wei Bai's eagerness made Wen Jinqian fall silent for a long time. Then, he finally couldn't suppress the smile on his face. "Oh, it's the #1 beauty." Chapter 24-24. Wei Wei Bai glared at him and suddenly pushed him away. This time, it was easy to push him away. When Jinqian even calmly took a few steps back, the smile on his face deepening. Wei Wei Bai walked forward, the chains on her ankles jingling softly. Under everyone's strange, shocked, and confused gazes. She walked over. When Jinqian calmly followed behind her with his hands behind his back, as if he was her follower. Everyone automatically made way for them. Except for one person. Blue Phoenix looked at Wen Jinqian coldly, then stared at Wei Wei Bai with disdain and coldness. Wei Wei Bai's dazzling face made her, as a woman, feel that it was too beautiful. This kind of beauty was like a demon's existence. Blue Phoenix smiled coldly. "I thought Lord Wenjun was a gentleman, but I didn't expect you to fall for the demon's tricks. Is this a fox transformed into a demon? She's only good at seducing men, but you were bewitched. A mere golden core cultivator. And a golden core cultivator who relied on Wen Jinqian's power. He actually dared to embarrass her like this." Wen Jinqian did not answer, but looked up and glanced at her indifferently. His eyes were unusually calm. Blue Phoenix felt a chill down her spine, as if she was being stared at by a poisonous snake. Blue Phoenix shivered, but when Jin Qian looked away and looked at Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai walked in front of her and looked at her curiously for a long time. That strange gaze did not look like it was provoking, but it looked like it was observing something. Wei Wei Bai said to the system, "She's so pretty, she's really the #1 beauty." Blue Phoenix's beauty was cold and aloof, as if she did not belong to this world. She was very pleasing to the eye, and even a beauty who was angry would think she looked good. The system said, "You have the beauty suppressor, don't be afraid, go and suppress her." Wei Wei Bai said, "I think my face is not as good as hers." The aloof fairies were much more popular than the seductive vixens. "What happened to your face? He's much more powerful than her." Wei Wei Bai was delighted. "Is she prettier than her?" The system replied, "No, your skin is thicker than hers. Even if she cultivated for 10,000 years, she still wouldn't be able to compare to you." Wei Wei Bai, he often wanted to squeeze the system to death, and this impulse was like the power of the tides, going back and forth without end. Wei Wei Bai deliberately stood beside High Lord Blue Phoenix. 10 minutes couldn't be wasted. When Jin Qian had stolen all the headlines, her heart ached for her life value of 50. He could only use the residual warmth of others' shock to get himself as close to the #1 beauty as possible. She was even more beautiful than the #1 beauty. This was a drug that was used to control facial cancer. She looked at High Lord Blue Phoenix excitedly. She couldn't help but reach out and grab her hand, wanting to take a photo with her. In the end, High Lord Blue Phoenix thought that she was going to humiliate her. Her eyes turned cold, and her tone was incomparably cold. "A mere little spirit dares to approach me." After that, High Lord Blue Phoenix's fingertip was about to send a stream of spirit energy into Wei Wei Bai's body. The power of a Mahayana cultivator could destroy heaven and earth. A stream of spirit energy was enough to make Wei Wei Bai's soul disappear. Not only did her obsession fail, but she was also humiliated. For High Lord Blue Phoenix, who was brought back to life by others, this was a great humiliation. Just as the spirit energy touched Wei Wei Bai's body, the violent spirit energy suddenly wrapped around her finger. High Lord Blue Phoenix's expression changed, but it was too late to withdraw. She desperately pushed back, but her expression changed drastically. Cold sweat poured out, and her whole body staggered backward. She couldn't stand still and sat on the ground. Is at https://www.sashu.com// Chapter 24-25. Lord Blue Phoenix trembled desperately, her face as pale as a sick ghost. She looked up. But she saw that when Jin Qian had already put his hands on Wei Wei Bai's shoulders. His eyes were always on the girl, his black eyes were bottomless, but there was a layer of hazy affection. And the spirit energy in the hall had been drained in a short time. The exchange just now. It was a fight between the early stage of Mahayana and the former Lord Soar. All the spirit chi in the air was completely consumed by this simple move. It was dangerous. But for Wen Jinqian, he didn't even raise his hand. Not only had High Lord Blue Phoenix been defeated, but her source had also been injured. And the lowest level immortal cultivator present, Wei Wei Bai, was still a good-for-nothing immortal cultivator who ate lotus flowers. He asked the system calmly, "I was in the same frame with the #1 beauty just now, why was she so scared that she sat on the ground?" The supermarket couldn't be fooling her, right? The so-called oppressive beauty was actually oppressive. Making the opponent sit on the ground in fear, she was oppressive. This was not the oppressive beauty she wanted. System. Maybe she was hit by your beauty, so her legs went soft. Bai Weiwei, although you said what I wanted to hear the most, do I still look like I'm mentally retarded? It must be that the number one beauty just now, there was something wrong with the finger that stretched out. Because when Jin Qian was just standing behind her, but his hands fell on her shoulders. Then she felt the air around her dry up. Although the rest of the feelings were isolated. But she knew, probably, maybe when Jin Qian just fought with the number one beauty. After all, there were all kinds of moves in the immortal cultivation world. It was not impossible for the kind of fancy martial arts that could destroy the earth in 1 second. Lord Blue Phoenix slowly got up, her face was pale, and a trace of blood flowed from the corner of her mouth. She stared at Wei Wei Bai, stared. Why did she feel that her beauty was unusually dazzling? It was as if he would be tempted if he continued staring at her. Pooey! High Lord Blue Phoenix forcibly retracted his gaze and sneered. 100 years of obsession is nothing but a joke. I sincerely came here to ask for advice. Everyone says that High Lord Wenjun has a noble temperament and a peaceful character. I didn't expect you to be so shameless and humiliate me like this. These words were simply too harsh. The others also looked at each other. It was indeed shameful to be rejected when he proposed. However, it was rare to see Reverend Clear Wind lose his composure like this. And everyone saw it just now. She had ruthlessly attacked that golden core stage girl, intending to destroy her soul. That was why when Jin Qian fought back. An eye for an eye. When Jin Qian could not be blamed for this. If there was anyone to blame, it was when Jin Qian's fault for falling for her. Moreover, the person he was attracted to was so weak. It was no wonder that he was caught in the crossfire. When Jin Qian's focused gaze finally shifted away from Wei Wei Bai, he raised his eyelashes, his dark eyes cold and calm. Humiliate. These words are a bit harsh. Before you entered the sect today, I didn't know you. When Jin Qian's words were neither fast nor slow, but they were unusually vicious. On the contrary, you were the one who attacked my fiancé. Who is the shameless one? As he spoke, he slowly walked forward, blocking Wei Wei Bai behind him. The young man had an extraordinary aura. His eyes were cold, and the lotus between his eyebrows seemed to be burning. For the first time, everyone in the hall felt a world-destroying pressure. It rose out of thin air. Everyone was sent into a situation of certain death. Some cultivators' expressions changed drastically. For a moment, they couldn't hold on and immediately took out their Dharma treasures to block this terrifying power. Chapter 24-26. Surging spiritual energy continued to appear from Wen Jinqian's surroundings. Supremacy Blue Phoenix was the first to bear the brunt. Her pupils constricted, and protective magic treasures immediately appeared around her. However, these things shattered inch by inch in the air, turning into golden specks of light. Everyone's faces were extremely ugly and pale. When Jin Qian still stood in place, indifferent and aloof. He didn't even raise his fingers. His beautiful white skin was as cold and pure as snow. The immortal cultivators from before Soar had absolute authority over all the other immortal cultivators. It wasn't that there weren't any who could challenge the strong. However, the most powerful visitor at the scene was only in the middle stage of the Mahayana realm. Not to mention challenging Wen Jinqian. Even if all of them went up together, they wouldn't be able to achieve a real challenge. The only person at the scene who had the experience of challenging someone of a higher level. It was Wen Jinqian himself. He was polite to others because he was giving them face. If he didn't give them face, he would directly fall out with them. Everyone would be buried in the Heavenly Gate sect. No one could do anything to him. He was a king at the peak of strength. Fortunately, he had been in seclusion all this time, so he gave people the illusion that he had a gentle temper. Wen Jinqian's indifferent eyebrows were exceptionally exquisite. In the white specks of light, there was actually a hint of demonic. Maybe it's because my temper is too good that you think my people are easy to bully. No matter how weak Wei Wei Bai was. The person standing behind her was him. Whoever dared to show the slightest disrespect to her was provoking him. Most of them were weak disciples and grand disciples who were bullied by others. It would cause the immortal cultivators behind them to seek revenge. Wen Jinqian wasn't such a protective person. After all, his disciple had lost. As long as she wasn't maliciously murdered, she would lose or be beaten. They all had to rely on their own strength to regain their dignity. Those who were too weak couldn't enter the Heavenly Gates sect. But now it was different. He finally knew what it meant to unconditionally protect her. The little fox had always been weak, and her cultivation talent was also low. Anyone could bully her. Could it be that he would let her be bullied and let her become stronger to regain her dignity? No, he would kill those who bullied her on the spot. Don't let her suffer even a little bit. A few traces of redness overflowed from the depths of Wen Jinqian's black pupils. He closed his eyes and suppressed his intense emotions. He didn't want to let his demonic state deepen. But he still felt very angry. He wanted to kill. When the demonic thoughts, his momentum. The spirit chi began to transform into a cold and sharp energy, ready to slaughter the people at the scene at any time. If these spiritual energies were to be suppressed down, death were inevitable. Just as those cultivators were preparing to use all their strength to fight against Wen Jinqian's power, Wen Jinqian suddenly stopped them. When a destructive struggle was about to begin, a pair of soft hands gently hugged Wen Jinqian's waist from behind. The ruthlessness in his heart actually eased. "Master," she called out softly, seemingly puzzled. After all, she was standing behind him, so every bit of his power went around her. Therefore, she just felt that the air was not very good, eh? The little fox's delicate and weak body was pressed against his burning back. Her voice was much sweeter and softer because of her worry. Her lips were close to his clothes as she whispered softly. "Master, I'm tired." If the system didn't say it, she wouldn't have known that Wen Jinqian was going to slaughter everyone. Who could be so calm when they were possessed? Moreover, the progress bar of the possessed didn't change. Who would have known that he was possessed? Wen Jinqian's back tensed up a little. He suddenly withdrew all his power. Then he turned around and reached out to touch her face. His eyes were incomparably deep. "You're tired. Let's go rest." His tone sounded a little passionate. Before Wei Wei Bai could react, the scene changed and they were already back in the lotus pond. Wei Wei Bai finally realized something and immediately expressed that she wasn't tired. Wen Jinqian was silent for a long time before saying softly, "It's okay. I'll be tired later." Wei Wei Bai. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 90. What do you want to do with the favorability increasing at this time? / button at the bottom to record the reading record. Comma. Chapter 24-27. As for the people in the reception hall, they were all sitting on the futons exhausted. Even the big shots who had experienced countless life and death situations. At this moment, under the pressure of the supreme powerhouse, they had developed fear and inner demons. Especially Blue Phoenix, she spat out a mouthful of blood. And her skin began to bleed. Because of the huge pressure, her strong physical body began to crumble. Just now, when Jinqian really wanted to kill her, she immediately took out a life-saving pill and stuffed it into her mouth. It took a lot of effort to stop the bleeding. But her cultivation had abruptly regressed by a stage. From the early stage of the Mahayana realm, she almost fell out of the Mahayana realm. She looked at everyone in the Heavenly Gate sect with resentment. She bit out a name. Wen Jinqian. And that little fox bitch. She was at odds with them. Several disciples who were suppressed by their master to the point of almost vomiting blood stood up helplessly at this time. They quickly comforted the other supremacies. No one expected their master to suddenly become angry. However, their little junior sister was bullied, and a violent anger surged in their hearts just now. After all, the Heavenly Gate sect was famous for protecting their own. He had come to their territory and even attacked their people. It was good for their master to be angry. But when they went out and were beaten by others, their master seemed to be indifferent. If they were beaten to death, they would be punished when they came back. This treatment, compared to their little junior sister, did they pick her up or give her away? No matter what, they still had to clean up their mess. Mystic One took the lead and smiled respectfully to comfort the big shots. He also expressed that he hoped that everyone would give him face at his master's wedding. How could they not give him face? In the cultivation world, strength was respected. In the past, when Jinqian didn't care about anything and had been in seclusion. If when Jinqian was willing, with this strength, they had to respectfully lower their heads and call him senior. Being young and old was not a problem. Strength was the hard fist. Moreover, when Jinqian was obviously not angry at them just now, but at Blue Phoenix supremacy. They were not as skilled as others, so they were affected. They couldn't blame Wen Jinqian for anything. They could only blame themselves for being weak. They were all old demons who were thousands of years old. Everyone drank the spiritual energy lotus tea sent by the Heavenly Gate sect. After recovering his primordial chi, he immediately put on a polite smile. Whether or not he would take revenge in the future was one thing. In Wen Jinqian's territory, they had to be polite. The only exception was High Lord Blue Phoenix. After she finished cursing the Heaven sect, he immediately flicked his sleeves, staggered, took out a flying tool, and rushed out of the Heavenly Gate sect. Then, it disappeared into the clouds. Su San, who had been staying in the corner, curled his lips and followed without saying anything. Xian Yi wanted to stop him, but it was too late. Su San was going to kill revered Lord Blue Phoenix. It was too risky. Even if High Lord Blue Phoenix was secretly cursing his master and the little fox, Su San should not be so impulsive. His current realm was still 2 to 3 levels lower than High Lord Blue Phoenix's. Even if he was severely injured, it would not be easy to kill him. Those who could cultivate to the Desheng stage were all old monsters. Su San was only 100 years old, and he was considered the most talented cultivator of the new generation in the Heavenly Gate sect. He was too inexperienced. Being so impulsive didn't seem like something he would do. Mystic One furrowed his brows and pondered for a while. Then, he couldn't help but come to the closed lotus hall. He respectfully told Wen Jinqian about Su San. He thought that his master would not answer. After all, during this period of time, no matter how he knocked on the door, he did not respond. If he had not crushed the bead, it would have been difficult to see him. Slash. Slash. Chapter 24-28. As soon as he finished speaking, he heard an indifferent response from the door. Let him go. If he doesn't die, I will spare his life. Xian Yi, he couldn't wrap his head around it. From Master's tone, he felt that Su San had committed a serious crime. Suddenly, he came to his senses. Su San and his junior apprentice sister had that kind of rumor. At that time, they all thought that Su San and junior sister were a couple. Then, the incident of Master turning into a demon happened. Then, Su-san was almost beaten to death by Master. Then, junior sister was locked up in the main hall. And Su-san was extremely haggard during this period of time. His stable temperament began to show flaws. All these little things were connected. Could it be that Master had long had a crush on junior sister? But junior sister and Su-san were both willing. Master's crush failed and he turned into a demon. Then, he wanted to beat Su-san to death. But junior sister sacrificed herself to appease Master and save Su-san. What kind of sadistic deep love was this? It was a love that implicitly held all kinds of labels of blackened, delicate, bloody, and tragic. It was simply, Xian-yi hurriedly stopped his out-of-control thoughts and left with cold sweat on his forehead. And in the main hall, there were already lotus flowers everywhere. The fragrance of the lotus flowers had a kind of magic power that made people sleepy. The red lotus flowers had a strong demonic aura. When Jin Qian was half lying in the flower, the petals were scattered, and the floor was a mess. His fair and light skin had a few more traces of drunkenness. His beautiful black eyes had turned dark red. There was a hint of laziness in his red eyes. And in his arms lay a cute little fox. Her fluffy tail was next to his body. This was her way of protesting. If she was too tired, she would turn into a little fox and reject him. He slowly reached out and touched her tail, letting her pretend to be unable to sleep. Anyway, there was plenty of time. She was hungry. She would return to her original state. Because it was a special method, she was forcefully sent to the golden core stage. She didn't even know the simplest way of fasting and would still be hungry. When Jin Qian also didn't teach her. He didn't even remind her that when she reached the golden core stage, she could start to absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth for her own use. It could also be converted into energy, and there was no need to eat mortal food. When Jin Qian's eyelashes were half closed, his red eyes were full of greed and passion. Meanwhile, Wei Wei Bai asked the system, "How's old monster when?" System, blocked. Wei Wei Bai, damn it, old freak Wen must still be a pervert. Otherwise, why would the system be blocked? If old monster Wen continues like this, she will turn black. Immortal cultivators were not humans. An old man who had been a hermit for 700 years was even more inhumane. The little fox held its head stubbornly, refusing to turn into a human even if it died. Even when the hair on his tail is bald, he still doesn't change. Didn't they say that Qing Si could order when Jin Qian around? Not only did he not listen to her every time she gave him an order, he even became more irritable. Qing Si was really disappointing. The power was actually suppressed by Wen Jinqian's own spiritual energy. What was the use of it? 7 days passed in the blink of an eye. However, the Heavenly Gate sect had been extremely busy during this time. The things they wanted for the wedding were all top-notch. Little junior sister had become Master's wife. Everyone was dumbfounded. After the confusion, they did what they had to do. After all, no one dared to say anything about Master's matters. Moreover, little junior sister was quite cute, much better than that green phoenix supremacy. Everyone was relieved. Because when little junior sister first entered the sect, they didn't know the reason. They actually didn't hold a real disciple recruitment hall. Chapter 24-29. So in writing, they were not really master and disciple. This was good for public opinion. If they were really master and disciple, this would be a stain on Wen Jinqian's reputation. Heaven's Gate sect was decorated with lanterns and streamers. The fairyland with white as the main theme was now full of red. Wei Wei Bai was released a day in advance. She felt like she was Wen Jinqian's prisoner. Ever since when Jin Qian turned into a demon, she could not leave him for more than half a step. She did not need to see him the day before the wedding, because he was going to Heaven's Gate Sect's arcane realm to find some treasures as her dowry. Wei Wei Bai immediately rolled up her sleeves to provoke Wen Jinqian's darkening mission. The favorability was already 92. This was the first time she saw the favorability increase, so she was not happy. Instead, it was indescribable, and her waist trembled reflexively. The system said, "You can't escape, this darkening mission is not easy." The difference in strength between the two was not as big as heaven and earth. Wei Wei Bai, who was like a trash cultivator, could not succeed in anything in front of Wen Jinqian. Wei Wei Bai looked at the red wedding dress in front of her and frowned. "Aren't we getting married? Just slap him at the wedding and reject him." The system was speechless. He would never be as vicious as the host. Why was every sentence the host said a good way to torture people? And she said it in such a casual tone. Wei Wei Bai said, "But, this method is not safe, where is the number one beauty?" The system said, "She's recuperating, seems to have suffered a serious injury. She was almost killed by Wen Jinqian." In the end, when she managed to save her life, Su San attacked her from behind and stabbed her. If there were no accidents, the number one beauty would not be able to come out for at least 100 years. Wei Wei Bai said, "Let her move, how can she be the number one beauty if she can't get revenge after being slapped in the face like this?" The system was speechless. She was the number one beauty, not the number one fighter. He shed a pitiful crocodile tear for the number one beauty. Wei Wei Bai said, "Tongzi, turn into her inner demon and let her see my smug face. If she sees too much of it, she will get angry and take revenge." The system said, "Wait, why do you want her to seek revenge?" Wei Wei Bai, "Stop the wedding. That way, after I reject Wen Jinqian, I can find a chance to disappear for a while. Only then could the blackening value move. Otherwise, Wen Jinqian wouldn't have been able to maintain his blackened value at 60 for 1,000 years. The system said, "Even if you can stop the wedding, you won't be able to run far." In this world, he was terrified of the male lead. A high-level immortal plane was no joke. The power system was too similar to the system world. Wei Wei Bai lowered her head and looked at the chain on her ankle thoughtfully. "That's right. With this thing, we can't even get out of the door." The system said, "Actually, there are other ways to provoke the malevolence of the male lead." The host's brain was filled with malevolence. What torture methods could he not think of? Wei Wei Bai silently touched her kidneys. The system said, "Okay, I got it. She said it was for the blackening value. She's just afraid of the male lead." After Wei Wei Bai finished talking to the system about how to torture Wen Jinqian, she got up and changed into the red wedding dress. It was late at night. The outside was still brightly lit, and there was a hubbub of voices. After all, the sect leader of the Heaven's Gate sect was going to get married, so the preparations were very complicated. From time to time, she could see her senior brothers on flying swords, holding flowers, or some rare and exotic beast flying by. Wei Wei Bai opened the window and leaned against it. To make it easier for you to read next time, you can click. Chapter 24:30. She counted with her fingers when Wen Jinqian would appear. As she waited, she yawned lazily and closed her eyes. When Wen Jinqian returned, he saw Wei Wei Bai lying by the window, her red sleeves hanging under the window. Beautiful tassels fluttered from the sleeves. The girl's sleeping face was slightly flushed, and her silver hair draped over the fiery red wedding dress. She was gorgeous and unparalleled. He stood by the window and slowly reached out to touch her hair, his expression gentle. His black eyes were a little redder, reflecting her beautiful face. 700 years of loneliness. At this moment, he finally received beautiful comfort. When Jinqian stared at her quietly, he had never been so glad that he was possessed. Only he, who was possessed, could abandon the hypocritical calmness and not let go of her, nor let go of himself. He had to tie the two of them together. If he was normal, he might have heard about her and Su-san. He would have really helped them with his hypocrisy. When he thought of that terrible scene, when Jinqian's heart ached sharply, he pursed his thin lips, and his eyes became cold and treacherous. Perhaps the cold aura made the little fox a little uneasy. She opened her eyes and saw Wen Jinqian's dark face again. The possessed Wen Jinqian. It was like the wind and rain. He was fine just now, but in the blink of an eye, he was going to kill someone. She immediately tugged at his sleeve and smiled sweetly. "Master, you're back. I've been waiting for you for a long time." It sounded like she was waiting for him. When Jinqian's dark eyes turned tender and pure, his voice was gentle. "Don't lie by the window. Be careful not to catch a cold. Wei Bai, no matter how useless you are still at the golden core stage. If a golden core stage cultivator catches a cold, will the entire cultivation world laugh to death?" Of course, there was no need to refute such a small matter. She supported her chin with both hands and narrowed her round eyes. Her charming little appearance was so seductive. "I say, Master, do you like me?" When Jinqian's deep and dark eyes rippled with tenderness, his voice was a little hoarse. "Don't you know whether you like it or not?" Bai Weiwei leaned forward, her beautiful neck peeking out from under the collar. "How much do you like it?" Her fingers hooked around his clothes. He was like a real fox spirit that could bring calamity to the country and the people. She had to dig out his heart and liver. When Jinqian reached out and held her fingertips. "Don't mess around." His current demonic state did not allow her to seduce him in the slightest. Wei Bai stared at him for a while before lowering her voice. "Shizuen, I still think this is a dream. After all, you didn't let me like you." When Jinqian's expression changed a little, and he sounded a little anxious. "That was a lie." Wei Bai burst into laughter. "I knew that Shizuen likes to joke." When Jinqian's tense heart relaxed a little, but he saw the young girl slowly drag him over. "Master, we can't see each other the day before the wedding. I can only trouble you to climb the window and not let anyone see you." As she matured, she became more and more aware of how to play tricks. She used an innocent attitude to do the most charming things. But when Jinqian was willing to be seduced by her, he couldn't even imagine that he would really follow her wishes. Like an ordinary person, he climbed through the window and entered the room. Then he entered the brightly lit room. She slowly took off her wedding dress. "I'll wear it tomorrow." Under the light, she looked at him sideways, mesmerizing him. "I'll wear it tomorrow." Her willing words made him think of tomorrow. Chapter 24:31. They looked like they were getting married. When Jinqian bent down slightly and murmured in her ear, "Okay, wear it tomorrow," the redness in his eyes lessened a little. The bar for bewitchment also dropped from 60 to 50. Wei Bai was not flustered at all. This was a night of candlelight talk. She only gave him a slight smile, and his favorability towards her climbed up to 94. When she woke up the next day to put on the wedding dress, the chains around her ankles disappeared as well. She just said that her foot hurt and he untied it. Wei Bai calmly let the maid draw her eyebrows. Her eyes were bright and the lotus petals between her eyebrows were beautiful and delicate. When the time came, she heard a familiar voice outside. Junior sister, you can get on the sedan now. This voice, was it Su-san? Wei Wei Bai said, when Jin Qian, this old monster, is really jealous. If she and Su-san really had something going on, wouldn't it be killing his heart? She actually let her rumored boyfriend carry the sedan. The system did not dare to say anything. The host was mentally disabled for a while and did not know about the development of Su-san's feelings. Although he was mentally disabled now, Su-san had already put away all his emotions. So to Su-san, this was a pig's heart. Wei Wei Bai stood up casually. The maid helped her and she covered her head. When she got on the sedan, she said to the system, just do as I say. System. That's a bit cruel. Wei Wei Bai, become mentally disabled, dear. System, host, have you been hit by the side quest? When the sedan landed, the curtain was lifted. A piece of red cloth was placed in her hand. And opposite the red cloth was Wen Jinqian. She slowly got up and walked out of the sedan door. The beautiful flame of the wedding dress flashed in front of her eyes. Su-san stood by the sedan, expressionless, his body straight. When Wei Wei Bai was led into the main hall, he only dared to look up at her back. Along the way, lotus flowers bloomed and cranes cried. Her red dress was as gorgeous as flames, so beautiful that it was breathtaking. Suddenly, Su-san felt a sharp pain in his mind. He immediately closed his eyes and did not dare to look again. Beside him, Xian Yi's expression also changed as he felt the pressure from his master. He looked at Su-san's pale face and sighed helplessly. Then, he pulled his hand and went to the side. Sometimes, he really felt that his little junior sister was actually a scourge. Wei Wei Bai walked to Wen Jinqian's side and was about to reach out her hand. A loud voice came from outside the Heavenly Gate sect's array. Supremacy Wenjun, today is your wedding, but you didn't invite us. Are you looking down on us? Wen Jinqian looked out the door. A hint of red flashed through his deep black eyes, but it disappeared in the blink of an eye. Then, his voice was soft and steady. Everyone has come to give me face. Today is my wedding, and to welcome the guests, the Great Gate Protecting Array has been activated. The array had just been activated. Several streaks of rainbow light flew over and landed outside the main hall. It turned out to be those old monsters of the Deshang stage. All of them were exuding immortal energy. The weakest one, the heavily injured Blue Phoenix High Lord, was also present. The newcomer did not come with good intentions. The atmosphere was not right. Wei Wei Bai seemed to be a little uneasy and wanted to secretly remove the veil. A slender and beautiful hand gently pressed down on her fingers, and a lazy and smiling voice stopped her movement. I can only remove it when we are in the bridal chamber. Wei Wei Bai frowned and whispered, Master. When Jinqian calmly and gently stared at her for a while before whispering, it's time to change the way you address me. From now on, I will be your husband. In this atmosphere, he was still as calm as ever. Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips and smiled. Husband. When Jinqian's beautiful eyes were stained with a gentle light. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 96. The increase of favorable impression points was like free cabbages. The strongest cultivator of the Deshang stage stood at the front. He was stubborn and cold, and when he saw Wen Jinqian, he forced himself to be polite. Today, we didn't want to disturb Supremacy Wenjun, but Blue Phoenix High Lord vouched with her life, so we had to verify it. Wen Jinqian glanced at them indifferently before taking a step forward. He was getting married today. His black hair was tied up with a jade crown, and his slender body was wearing a bright red groom's robe. His pale jade-like face and the red of his clothes added a bit of gorgeous color to this cold and emotionless youth. Other than my marriage, what else can there be today? As soon as these words came out, the surrounding spiritual energy seemed to stagnate, making people feel very uncomfortable. The leading cultivator frowned slightly, but still said coldly, "The matter of you becoming a demon." As soon as these words came out, everyone was in an uproar. When Jin Qian became a demon. Quick, comma. Chapter 2432. However, Wei Wei Bai and the system were extremely calm. After all, they were the ones who sent out the secret. To let the number one beauty know that when Jin Qian was possessed, the system really cosplayed as a demon and turned into Wen Jin Qian every day. It ran to the number one beauty who was in seclusion and strolled in front of her. It even tried to restore Wen Jin Qian's red-eyed appearance. A woman who went crazy for love was very scary and meticulous. It would be fine if there was no suspicion, but there were some clues. She immediately remembered that there was something wrong with Wen Jin Qian. For example, he was more irritable. Although he looked gentle, he was so cold that it made people's scalps tingle. What was even scarier was that sometimes there was a flash of red light in Wen Jin Qian's eyes. If Wen Jin Qian was possessed, then she could take revenge. Therefore, Blue Phoenix immediately sent the news to the few old monsters who were like her, who were at the Mahayana stage. She originally thought that even if Wen Jin Qian was possessed, this group of people would only send one of them. After all, at this level of cultivation, everyone was waiting for Soar. No one was bothered to meddle in other people's business. It wasn't a big deal to be possessed by the devil. There were many people in the cultivation world who were possessed every day. But this time, all the old monsters came out of seclusion. As soon as they heard that Wen Jin Qian was possessed, this group of people were like vultures smelling rotten meat and actually came together. Even High Lord Blue Phoenix was both happy and confused. It was better to mess up Wen Jin Qian's wedding. Wei Wei Bai and the system actually felt that the number one beauty was really amazing. She could actually make so many top immortal cultivators gather together to stop Wen Jin Qian's wedding. Wei Wei Bai said enviously, "The number one beauty is so charming." System, by Wei Wei's side, "You see, with just one roar, so many men have gathered around to help her disrupt the wedding of the person she likes." System, it couldn't answer. If it did, the host would keep talking about the number one beauty. She was possessed by the number one beauty. It must not talk to her about this topic. Wei Wei Bai said faintly, "Number one beauty." The system silently plugged its ears. It had to block the host immediately. Moreover, was this a matter of the number one beauty? Her favorable impression of him had soared to such an extent. There was still no sign of a side quest. She felt like a retard holding a broken bowl and waved at him from not far away. Around the hall, all the guests looked at Wen Jin Qian in confusion. Then, they looked at him in shock. Possessed by the devil. There were many people who had succumbed to the demonic path. But being possessed by the devil was still the most terrifying thing. Once they were bedeviled, 7 or 8 out of 10 cultivators would go crazy, no matter how powerful they were. He had become cruel and inhumane. In fact, they might even fall into the demonic path and become the main force of the demonic path. Almost no one could return to normal after becoming a demon. Who was Wen Jin Qian? This was an immortal cultivation genius that had appeared out of nowhere. He was the only immortal cultivator in the world who had the strength before Soar. He was also famous for having no desires. He was cold and indifferent, but he was a gentleman who never did anything wrong. The only time he had cheated was when he married a disciple that he had half taken in. He said that he was his disciple. However, he was not listed in the register, nor was there a disciple recruitment ceremony held. In the world of immortal cultivators, he really couldn't be considered a disciple. Therefore, it was not considered a stain. At most, they were surprised that when Jin Qian had actually become enlightened. He just wanted to get married. And the person he was marrying was a little monster. Oh, the little monster had just been formed. There was no murderous aura and it was incomparably pure. Therefore, although everyone was surprised, they were still polite and gave their blessings. /fast to read the full article / fast download fast to read to facilitate your next reading, you can click on that fast, comma. Chapter 2433. They never thought that when Jin Qian would be related to being bewitched. The 5 Mahayana cultivators at the entrance of the hall were all cold and serious. Supremacy Blue Phoenix was even weaker, revealing a ferocious hatred. When Jin Qian looked at them calmly, there was no trace of intense emotion in his cold and dark eyes. He didn't look like he was bewitched at all. But his words were calm, there was a killing intent that chilled people to the bone. So you deliberately chose today to be a guest, just for this small matter. Small matter. Was being bewitched a small matter? If when Jin Qian was really bewitched, then the lives of the guests today would be in his hands. Because bewitched people were unreasonable. No matter how calm they looked, they might start killing in the next second. A bewitched person like Wen Jin Qian was the most terrifying weapon. Who wouldn't be afraid? The guests who attended the wedding had slowly stood up, all of them looking bad. And Wen Jin Qian's disciple couldn't help but press his fingers on his sword. His master had been bewitched, and all his close disciples knew. But no one leaked the secret. In fact, if these people really wanted to attack Wen Jin Qian, everyone in the Heavenly Gate sect would fight to the death. Supremacy Blue Phoenix's face was as cold as ice. She sneered, Wen Jin Qian, if you are not bewitched, how can you look so guilty? This is a spirit artifact to test whether a person is bewitched. If you are not bewitched, put your hand on it. After saying that, an old monster of the Mahayana stage took out a round transparent bead. If one was not bewitched, touching the bead would not change color. If one was bewitched, it would produce a dark color according to the degree of the bewitched. Wen Jin Qian's dark and cold eyes were calm and cold, but he was still calm. It's rare for me to have a happy day, and I don't want to get angry. It's not too late for you to leave now. Several old monsters of the Mahayana stage gathered together, and it was because of such an important matter like being bewitched. Even if Wen Jin Qian was a powerhouse of Soar. But the Heavenly Gate sect was a new sect, and there was no lack of amazing disciples. But the time was too short, and they had no foundation. And Wen Jin Qian's genius made many people jealous. It was rare to see him in trouble, and there were many people adding fuel to the fire. Therefore, this group of people continued to be aggressive. Lord Wenjun, you know the rules of the immortal cultivation world. Anyone who has turned into a demon should be punished. If you haven't turned into a demon, all of us will cripple one of our realms to ask for your punishment. Lowering one realm. This was a show of complete sincerity. Everyone knew how difficult it was to break through to the next realm. Especially in the Desheng stage, this group of people have been stuck in the Desheng stage for hundreds of years, or even thousands of years. Seeing that his life was about to come to an end, he still couldn't make a breakthrough. That was why he took out a realm as an apology. That was really using his life as a bargaining chip. The group of old cultivators standing in front of the door said coldly, if Sovereign Wenjun is possessed by the devil, then, we can only enforce justice on behalf of the heavens. This was simply a slap in the face. Wen Jin Qian's cold eyes turned red. Enforcing justice on behalf of the heavens, what a joke. If he didn't have any ulterior motives. Would these people care if he was possessed or not? Some speculations flashed through his mind. The dark and ferocious beast in his heart slowly pushed the door open. He had purposely chosen today to come. It was also because it was a day of great joy that his heart was in turmoil. There was a gap in his heart. For immortal cultivators, it was a weakness. When Jin Qian unhurriedly revealed a smile. It seems that everyone is really here to court death. /fast to read / fast download fast to read on. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the fast, comma. Chapter 24:34. These words were said gently and calmly. Those who couldn't hear it would think that when Jin Qian was very gentle just by looking at his attitude. The lotus between her eyebrows was so red that it was about to burn. A small hand gently grabbed Wen Jinqian's sleeve. The little fox's delicate and sweet voice was a little puzzled. Husband. When Jin Qian paused, and the hostility in his heart disappeared again. The beast retracted its claws. He narrowed his eyes, and his calm tone had a hint of gentleness. It's okay, let's settle some things before getting married. Years of forbearance in cultivation had caused him to become obsessed. He still looked indifferent. Some people looked at him like this. They actually felt that a person who had become obsessed couldn't be in Wen Jinqian's state. After all, not many people who had become obsessed could remain rational. When Jin Qian looked so normal. Could it be that he was wronged? Just as the public opinion began to lean towards Wen Jinqian's side. Blue Phoenix's pale face revealed a trace of a cold smile. Before everyone could react. She had already vomited a mouthful of hard blood, and the blood beads immediately fell into the transparent bead. The bead smashed open. All of them attacked Wen Jinqian. Wen Jinqian stretched out his hand, and countless lotus petals detached from the blooming lotus. They blocked countless fragments. But some fragments went towards Wei Bai. When Jin Qian came to the little fox's side in the blink of an eye. The little fox still looked confused. After all, she was covered by a veil. She didn't see this sudden and silent scene. He rolled up his sleeve, but not a single fragment could touch the little fox. But when the fragment touched his sleeve, he frowned slightly. It didn't have any attack power. But the fragment turned black. In the beginning, the fragment wasn't meant to attack them, but to attach to Wen Jinqian's body. The fragment turned black, which meant that Wen Jinqian had become obsessed. Everyone was in an uproar and looked at the calm Wen Jinqian in shock. Wen Jinqian calmly brushed away the fragment. His beautiful eyes were as calm as water, and his face seemed to be covered with a veil. He had a holy temperament. He reached out and gently landed on her veil, but he didn't lift it. Little 7, follow behind me and wait for me to lift your veil. Wei Bai was silent for a moment before she nodded gently, but didn't ask anything. When Jin Qian smiled. His eyes finally lost their disguise and turned completely red. All of a sudden, the surrounding spirit chi surged violently, covering the sky and covering the earth. A power that could destroy the heavens and exterminate the earth gushed out with boiling killing intent. When he was bedeviled, he could trap an entire city and torture it for 600 years. Ever since he stepped onto the path of cultivation, he had been completely heartless. What gentleness! What nobility! He was just too lazy to care. In terms of viciousness and coldness, he was even colder and crueler than the demons. He was just too lazy to hide his true nature after being bewitched. In fact, it was more like a human. After all, cruelty and viciousness were also emotions. Therefore, from the moment he fell in love with the little fox, he was no longer heartless and emotionless. That was his nature. He was willful, arrogant, cruel, and evil. The young man's wedding robes fluttered because of the spiritual energy. His black hair and slender body made him look like an immortal. His thin red lips slowly curled up. The lotus petals were all shattered and flew up. His red eyes were clear and seductive. Today is the day of my wedding. There is not enough red, so I'll have to trouble you to pave the way with blood. He gave them a chance to leave. They didn't want it. Then don't blame him for not treating guests well. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.